Hi guys, and welcome to the Gentle History Podcast. Tonight we step out beneath a sky so wide it seems to breathe over the prairie. While your boots sink into dust, your stomach folds in on itself, and the wagon behind you creaks like it has private complaints. The beans are nearly gone. The flour sack lies flat as a tired pillow, somewhere out in the dark. A coyote gives a thin little laugh, which is rude, frankly, because you probably won't survive this if you packed like the average optimistic settler. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, tell me where you are listening from and what the local time is, because somewhere, someone is hearing this at midnight, and someone else is pretending it is not yet morning. Now, dim the lights, and feel the trail settle around you. You are moving west in the long age that people later call the Wild West. Although nobody around you calls it that with any romance, they call it the road, the plains, the crossing, the country ahead, the place where rain may not come, where wheels break, where neighbours disappear into distance, and where hunger is not a dramatic event but a slow companion. It walks beside the oxen, it sits beside the children, it waits in the bottom of every tin cup. At first, hunger is only arithmetic. You count pounds of flour, strips of bacon, sacks of beans, dried apples, coffee, salt, and maybe a little sugar if fortune has smiled on you and not laughed afterward. You count mouths, you count days, you count miles. Then the land makes its own calculations. Mud slows you, heat spoils meat. A river rises, a wheel hub cracks, someone falls ill. A mule wanders, a bag gets wet. The neat little figures you scratched into a notebook back in Missouri or Iowa begin to look almost adorable, like a child's drawing of a storm. A mainstream fact, simple and stubborn, is that many emigrant families heading west in the mid-19th century carried months of provisions in covered wagons. Yet those supplies were often planned against ideal travel times that nature did not respect. The trail was not a grocery aisle with scenery. It was a moving gamble. Every pound of food competed with tools, bedding, clothing, seed, weapons, medicine, and sentimental furniture somebody insisted was essential because, yes, apparently the walnut chair must see Oregon. You feel this problem in the wagon's groan. Too much weight can kill an animal. Too little food can kill a family. So you make choices that are boring until they become terrifying. You leave behind trunks. You abandon cast iron if you have too much of it. You pour out luxuries with a bitterness that tastes sharper than vinegar. Sometimes, along the old emigrant roads, the discarded possessions pile up in strange roadside graveyards books, bedsteads, stoves, mirrors, cracked barrels, and once cherished objects made useless by distance. A quirky tidbit from trail accounts is that some routes became so littered with abandoned goods that later travellers could scavenge them like a melancholy outdoor shop. Though the inventory was usually heavy, broken, or emotionally confusing, you trudge on. The smell is a mixture of ox sweat, sun-warmed canvas, old grease, damp wool, wood smoke, and people who have had a very limited relationship with bathing. The air at dawn can be almost sweet, full of grass and sage, but by afternoon the wagon train lifts dust into your mouth until every swallow feels faintly crunchy. Hunger sharpens your senses. The hiss of bacon in a pan becomes a hymn. The scrape of a spoon against a kettle sounds louder than conversation. Even coffee, weak and boiled until it seems personally offended, becomes precious. But months without enough food do not always mean total absence of food. This is important. Survival on the frontier often depended on stretching, substituting, borrowing, bartering, hunting, foraging, and lowering expectations with remarkable speed. A person might not eat well, But eating poorly could still be the difference between reaching the next fort and becoming another warning told around campfires. You learn the grammar of scarcity. Thick soup becomes thin soup. Bread becomes ash cake. Dinner becomes a mouthful. Breakfast becomes a rumour. And here, in the soft dark of our story, you begin to understand that hunger is social history as much as survival history. It is not only men with rifles scanning the horizon, it is women dividing flour with quiet precision. It is children licking plates because nobody tells them not to. It is elders insisting they are not hungry, which everyone knows is a lie and nobody challenges because dignity is sometimes the last warm blanket. It is neighbours sharing a handful of meal today and hoping the favour returns before the next storm. Frontier hunger is made of weather, work, pride, fear, kindness, and the awkward silence when there's not enough to go around. Historians still argue whether the strongest force in frontier survival was individual toughness or community cooperation, and the truth may lie uneasily between them. You need personal endurance. Certainly. You need the ability to walk when your legs ache and chew food that tastes like boiled cloth. But you also need borrowed knowledge, shared labour, traded goods, and sometimes rescue from people you may never fully thank. The lone pioneer, standing heroic against the horizon, makes a fine painting. The actual hungry settler more often survives because someone else knows where water hides, how to bake with almost nothing, or which plant will not send everyone into a regrettable evening. Tonight, you're not racing through a tale of conquest. You're slowing down enough to hear the small sounds that kept people alive. The crackle of a fire coaxed from damp twigs. The dull thud of corn being pounded. The creak of a cupboard door opened though everyone knows what is inside. The murmur of a mother promising that tomorrow may be better. The breath of animals in the dark. Warm and grassy, as valuable as any bank account because they can pull, carry, milk, breed, or, in the worst case, feed. You look at the road ahead. It does not care about your courage. It does not admire your plans. The land is not cruel in the way people are cruel. It simply is. Hot, cold, dry, muddy, generous in one valley and merciless in the next. Settlers learn this slowly. And hunger is often the teacher. So you begin with the empty belly, because that is where survival becomes honest. Before the hunting stories, before the clever recipes, before the trading posts and the winter cabins, you stand beside a wagon at dusk and admit the plain truth there may not be enough. The sky darkens to violet. The last light catches on the rims of the wheels. Someone folds the flour sack and shakes it once. Hopefully, as if a miracle might be hiding in the seam, only a pale dust falls out. The fire is lit anyway. That matters, even with little to cook. People gather around flame. They warm their hands. They tell themselves the next creek may hold fish. The next settlement may sell meal. The next patch of timber may shelter game. Hope is not filling. No, very poor calorie content. Hope. Terrible on a nutrition label, but without it, nobody rises before dawn to yoke the animals. Shoulder the tools and keep moving. You take your place near the fire. The pot gives off steam so faint it seems shy. Around you, the prairie exhales, and the night insects start their small, steady music. Your hunger does not vanish, but it becomes part of the rhythm, a quiet ache, a reminder. A question that will follow you into every mile ahead when the food runs thin. What exactly keeps a person alive? The next morning, you wake before the sun has fully decided what kind of day it wants to be. The air is cold enough to make your fingers stiff. And the canvas above you glows faintly grey, sagging with dew somewhere nearby. An ox snorts like an old man judging everyone. Someone coughs, someone else whispers over a kettle, and you, poor thoughtful creature, reach for breakfast with the delicate hope of a person who has not yet looked inside the ration box. There is flour, but less than yesterday. Bacon, but only if sliced thin enough to qualify as an idea. Beans, hard as little stones. Coffee. Thank heavens. Though the word coffee is becoming increasingly generous. A few dried apples lie curled in a cloth bag, brown and wrinkled, looking like tiny frontier philosophers. You hold one in your palm and imagine orchards, ladders, autumn air, and the sweet foolishness of believing that dried fruit could remain exciting after the 37th serving. Food planning on the overland trails begins with confidence. Families gather advice from guidebooks, neighbours, returned travellers, merchants, and men in town who speak loudly because they have once seen a map. A standard emigrant outfit might include flour or hard bread, bacon or salt pork, beans, rice, coffee, sugar, dried fruit, salt, and sometimes cornmeal, vinegar, tea, or molasses. The supplies are dense, plain, and meant to last. This is not cuisine for applause. It is fuel for walking, lifting, mending, driving animals, and pretending that another pot of beans is a thrilling development. You measure everything because the wagon measures you back. Every sack adds weight. Every pound of bacon asks the oxen to pull a little harder. Every barrel takes space that might have held a shovel, a spare axle, a churn, a cradle, or that mysterious family object nobody can explain but everybody refuses to abandon until Nebraska. A common historical fact is that many wagon parties overloaded at the start and then discarded goods along the trail as animals weakened or terrain grew difficult. Food, however, is harder to abandon. You may throw away a rocking chair. You do not casually fling out flour unless things have become truly strange. Still, food disappears in ways that feel almost personal. Flour leaks through weak seams. Bacon sweats in heat. Beans get damp and sour. Coffee spills. A barrel cracks. A child feeds crumbs to a dog because the dog looked sad. And yes, this is sweet. But also, please stop helping. At river crossings, entire wagons can tip, soak, or drift. Imagine watching your food chest bob away in brown water, carrying breakfast, supper, and your remaining emotional stability downstream. Rationing becomes a daily ritual. You do not simply eat. You negotiate with the future. How much flour today if the next supply point is still 2 weeks away? How much bacon if hunting fails? How many beans can a family consume before everyone begins to regard the bean itself as an enemy? You learn that hunger is not always sudden. Often it begins as a small adjustment, a thinner slice, a smaller scoop, a second cup of hot water poured over grounds that have already given their best and are now simply participating for morale. The cooking is plain but intimate. A skillet sits over coals, dough made from flour, water, salt, and maybe a touch of grease becomes a rough bread. Bacon fat, when available, flavours everything like a wealthy relative briefly visiting. Beans simmer for hours if fuel allows. Though fuel does not always allow, on treeless stretches, people burn dried buffalo dung called chips, because survival has a way of lowering the glamour level. This quirky detail appears in many plains accounts. Buffalo chips made surprisingly useful fuel. Burning hot enough for cooking when wood was scarce. The smell, depending on dryness and personal optimism, was not always as dreadful as modern noses might assume. Still, nobody is turning it into a scented candle. You kneel beside the fire and watch the dough blister on the pan. The smell is warm and comforting, even if the bread itself could double as a small roof tile. Around you, wagons are being packed again. Chains clink. Leather creaks. A baby fusses, then settles. The morning is all small noises, each one tied to labour. Nobody survives months of scarcity by grand speeches. They survive by tying knots, scraping pans, counting cups, and noticing when a sack has been nibbled by mice. Ah, the mice. Of course, the mice have opinions about your pantry. So do ants, weevils, damp, mould, and heat. Food storage on the trail is a battle against little enemies. Flour must be kept dry. Bacon needs protection from flies. Dried fruit must stay sealed. Beans can endure much, but even beans have standards. In hot weather, salted meat can become rancid, and rancid meat forces the frontier cook into a grim debate between waste and digestion. There is sarcasm available here, but your stomach has requested respect. Historians still debate whether emigrant food shortages came more often from poor planning or from unpredictable delay. The answer shifts from journey to journey. Some families began undersupplied because they trusted bad advice or lacked money. Others packed carefully and still suffered when weather, illness, accident, animal loss, or blocked roads stretched the trip beyond all expectation. The trail punished both ignorance and bad luck, and sometimes it treated them almost the same. You feel that uncertainty with every mouthful. The food in your hand is not only food, it is time. A cup of flour is another mile. A strip of bacon is a colder morning made bearable. A spoon of sugar is a small festival in a tin cup. Coffee is warmth, habit, and the illusion that civilization has not entirely misplaced you. Even salt matters deeply. Without it, meat spoils faster. Bodies suffer under hard labor, and every dish tastes like resignation. At midday, the wagons halt near a shallow stream. The animals drink first, because without them you're not a traveller anymore, merely a person standing beside many heavy possessions. You mix a paste of flour and water. Someone slices bacon so thin the sun nearly shines through it. A few beans from last night are warmed again. The meal is eaten quickly, but not carelessly. Crumbs are gathered. Grease is saved. The pan is wiped with bread because washing away fat would be an offence against common sense. Then comes the small. Private math. You check the sack again. You press its sides. Estimate by feel. Remember what it weighed last week. The numbers do not comfort you. The country ahead is wide. The next trading post may have supplies, or it may have prices that make your soul sit down in the dust. There may be game, or only empty horizon. The grass may be good for the animals, or burned dry. Your food plan, once written in tidy columns, now lives in your hands, your nose, your tongue, and the tired eyes of everyone around the fire. Evening returns slowly. The sky turns gold, then rose, then a deep blue that seems to cool the whole world. Supper is smaller than anyone wants. A pot of beans, a heel of bread, coffee thin enough to see tomorrow through it. You eat, and while you eat, you listen. The spoon taps the tin plate. The oxen crop grass nearby. A woman hums under her breath while mending a tear in a sack. Because a torn sack can become a lost meal. The sound is soft, practical, and almost tender. This is how rationing changes you. It teaches you to see abundance in fragments. A handful of meal becomes promise. A saved spoonful of grease becomes flavour. A dry crust becomes breakfast if wrapped carefully. You begin to understand why settlers spoke so often of providence, luck, and weather in the same breath. Out here, dinner depends on all three, plus a working wagon wheel and a cook willing to make miracles out of beans again. Night gathers close. The ration box is shut. Not full, no, not reassuring, but shut. Tomorrow you will open it again, and the quiet negotiation will continue. By the time the trail has thinned your rations to careful spoonfuls, every movement in the grass begins to look like supper, a flicker near the creek, a dark shape on a ridge, a bird lifting from brush with a frantic clap of wings. Your eyes become sharper because your stomach has joined the scouting party. You walk beside the wagon, listening to the wheels complain, and you wonder whether the land ahead is empty, or whether food is watching you from just beyond reach. Hunting sounds simple when told later by warm people in comfortable rooms. The hungry settler shoulders a rifle, steps into noble sunlight, and returns with venison, wild turkey, or perhaps a buffalo, as though the prairie has thoughtfully laid out a menu. But you, moving through dust and distance, Learn quickly that game is not a pantry with legs. Animals have their own plans. They avoid noise. They follow water. They drift with seasons. They vanish after too many wagons, too many shots, too many fires, and too many hungry travellers thinking exactly what you are thinking. A plain historical fact worth holding gently is that bison still roam the Great Plains in enormous numbers during much of the early and mid-19th century, yet their presence varied by place, season, and the pressure of hunting. Some emigrants saw vast herds that shook the ground and darkened the horizon. Others saw little more than old tracks, bones, and disappointment. The frontier did not distribute its miracles evenly. One wagon train might gorge on fresh meat for several days, while another, only weeks behind, found the same country strangely silent. So you learn signs, hoofprints pressed in mud, droppings not yet dry, grass cropped low, feathers caught in brush, a trail through willow near a stream. The land becomes a page, and hunger teaches you to read. At dawn, you move quietly, or as quietly as a tired person carrying a firearm and wearing stiff boots can manage. The air smells of sage, damp earth, and old smoke from last night's fire. Your breath shows faintly, somewhere ahead. A meadowlark pours out a song far too cheerful for the situation. If you are lucky, you may hunt deer in timbered river bottoms, rabbits near brush, prairie chickens in tall grass, or ducks along wetlands, if you are very lucky. Bison appear within reach, though reach is a slippery word. A bison is not a sleepy cupboard. It is massive, powerful, and uninterested in becoming stew. Horses help experienced hunters close the distance, but many settler families do not have spare mounts fit for the task. Oxen, devoted though they are, do not provide the swift heroic chase one imagines. An ox pursuing bison would be less a hunt and more a deeply confused parade. A rifle shot is also a decision. Powder and lead are limited. Every missed shot wastes supplies you cannot replace easily. The sound may scatter game. It may also announce your presence to anyone within earshot. Welcome, or otherwise. You hold the weapon and feel its weight, not as romance, but as arithmetic. One shot, one chance, one hope that your hand does not tremble too much from hunger. When hunting succeeds, the mood changes at once. Fresh meat carries a smell that can make an entire camp lift its head. Fat spits over coals. Children hover too close. Adults pretend dignity while watching the pan. Meat means strength, warmth, and the brief relief of chewing something that has not already lived 6 weeks in a sack. It also means work. The animal must be skinned, cut, cooked, dried, salted if salt remains, and guarded from dogs, flies, heat and waste, on a trail. Abundance can become spoilage with rude speed. You slice strips of meat thin and hang them near smoke, hoping to dry what cannot be eaten. You boil bones for broth. You save fat when possible, because fat is treasure. Lean meat alone fills the mouth, but not always the body. People living under hard labour need calories, and the body quietly begs for richness. A pot with marrow, grease, or suet feels like kindness. Without it, even a full belly may remain strangely unsatisfied. There is a quirky old tidbit from frontier foodways that some travellers made use of prairie dog, rattlesnake, or even blackbirds when better game failed. Not every account agrees on taste, because hunger is a powerful seasoning and memory is a generous editor. A man who sneers at such food in town may accept it beside a cold campfire with impressive philosophical flexibility. You may tell yourself it is temporary. You may also discover that temporary can last several weeks. But hunting fails more often than legends admit. Rain blurs tracks, wind shifts scent. A party of louder travellers passes ahead of you and frightens animals away. The herd you spotted yesterday moves beyond reach. The creek has fish, but no deer. The rifle misfires. The shot wounds but does not bring down, leaving you ashamed, tired, and still hungry. In the evening, you return with nothing but burrs in your trousers and an expression nobody wants to question. Historians still argue whether hunting on the overland routes truly prevented starvation for most settlers, or whether its role has been exaggerated by later frontier storytelling. The evidence is uneven. Diaries often celebrate successful kills because they were memorable, while ordinary days of beans and rationed flour receive duller lines. That makes sense. Nobody writes 3 emotional pages about another disappointing biscuit unless the biscuit has done something dramatic. Yet those quiet failures matter. They show how unreliable wild food could be for families already moving through unfamiliar country under pressure. Native hunters, fur traders, and long-experienced plains travellers knew animal movements with a skill most newcomers lacked. They understood seasons, water sources, wind, herd behaviour, and the old patience of watching. Settlers sometimes learned from them directly, sometimes copied from them poorly, and sometimes ignored them with the confidence of people about to become hungry. The land rewarded attention, not pride. A track misread could mean a wasted day. A trail understood could mean meat enough for a camp. As twilight spreads, you walk back toward the wagons with a rabbit hanging from your hand. It is not enough for everyone, but it is something. Something matters. The rabbit is cleaned, stewed with a little flour to thicken the broth, and stretched with beans that have heard this performance before. The smell rises through camp, mild and savoury, steam beads on the rim of the kettle. Spoons dip carefully, because each person knows the pot has limits. You eat slowly. The meat is small, tender, and gone too soon, still. The broth warms your chest. Your hands stop shaking. Conversation loosens. Someone tells a story about a hunter who chased a turkey so long he forgot where camp was, which may or may not be true, but it gives everyone permission to smile. In hunger, even laughter becomes a ration worth sharing. Beyond the firelight, the prairie returns to shadow. Animals move there whether you see them or not. Tomorrow you may find tracks near the creek, or nothing. You may hear geese overhead, see antelope too far away, or watch a deer flash through cottonwoods like a brown ghost. The land is alive, but not obedient. It offers food in glimpses, signs, chances, and risks. So you wrap the leftover bones, because even bones can speak again in water. You bank the fire low. You listen to the night insects, the soft breathing of oxen, the faint clink of a rifle being cleaned for morning. Hunger lies down beside you, not defeated, only delayed. And while the stars rise in their cold, bright thousands, you understand that survival is not one successful hunt. It is the willingness to look again tomorrow, with tired eyes, empty hands, and just enough hope to follow the next track. By the next stretch of trail, your eyes have stopped searching only for animals. They drop lower now, toward leaves, stems, berries, seed heads, roots, and the damp edges of creeks where green things gather like whispered promises. Hunger changes the way you see a landscape. Yesterday, a patch of weeds was simply weeds. Today, you look at it with respect, suspicion, and the faint resentment of someone who may soon be chewing it. The wagon rolls behind you, tired and wooden, while the morning sun warms the grass. The air smells of crushed sage, dust, and the sour trace of old camp smoke clinging to your clothes. You move slowly along a creek bed where cottonwoods lift their leaves into a trembling silver light. Birds flicker in the branches. Insects hum over the water. Somewhere near your boot, a plant with small leaves grows in a cluster, and you wonder whether it is dinner, medicine, or a terrible mistake with roots. Foraging is one of the oldest human skills, but for many settlers moving west, The country's unfamiliar. Back east, you may know blackberries, walnuts, ramps, wild onions, or familiar greens. Out here, the plants change, the seasons change, the soil changes. A root that looks promising might be useful, bitter, useless, or dangerous. A berry can shine like a jewel and still introduce your stomach to an evening of regret. Nature, as ever, refuses to label anything clearly, which feels inconsiderate. It is well established that settlers on the frontier often supplemented stored food with wild plants such as berries, nuts, greens, roots, and seeds, when they knew what could be safely eaten. Along wooded streams, you might find plums, chokecherries, grapes, or rose hips. In some regions, acorns, walnuts, hazelnuts, or pine nuts offered calories if properly gathered and prepared. On the plains and in the mountain west, edible roots, bulbs, and greens could make the difference between a thin meal and no meal at all, but the important words are when they knew. Knowledge is the hinge on which the whole door swings. You crouch beside the creek and rub a leaf between your fingers. It smells sharp and green. You do not put it in your mouth yet, because the frontier is already trying hard enough to kill you without your enthusiastic cooperation. Instead, you watch someone older examine it. Perhaps a neighbour has learned from a trapper. Perhaps a woman in the party grew up gathering wild greens in another place and recognizes a cousin of something known. Perhaps an indigenous guide, trader, or passerby has shown which roots can be roasted, which berries need cooking, and which plants should be left politely alone. This borrowed knowledge matters. Settlers often depended on information from native peoples, though later stories sometimes softened or erased that dependence. Edible camas, for instance, was a major food in parts of the northwest, where native communities dug, cooked, and stored the bulbs with deep seasonal expertise. But camas had dangerous lookalikes, including death camas, which is exactly the sort of plant name that suggests nature may have a dark sense of humour. Knowing the difference was not a charming hobby, it was survival. There is an odd little note in frontier accounts that some hungry travellers tried to boil or roast plants they barely understood, then judge safety by whether livestock or birds seemed interested. This was not reliable science. Of course, it was more like asking a goat to serve as your food safety inspector, and goats are not known for cautious professional standards. Still, when supplies ran low, people watched animals closely. What deer browsed, what birds pecked, what bears dug, all became hints in a landscape full of quiet clues. You gather what you can, wild onions, if truly onions. Bring a welcome bite to soup. Lamb squatters and other greens may be boiled into something soft, earthy, and far better than staring at an empty pot. Berries stain fingers purple. Nuts require cracking, grinding, soaking, or roasting. But their richness can feel luxurious after weeks of flour and beans. Seeds may be parched or pounded. Roots can be baked in ashes, if you have the patience and the fuel. A meal made from such things is rarely elegant. It may be gritty, it may be bitter, it may contain one twig nobody admits seeing, but it is food. The work is slow. Foraging is not simply wandering with a basket while birds compose background music. You bend, dig, sort, wash, peel, test, cook, and share. Your back aches, dirt wedges under your nails, burrs cling to your skirt or trousers, mosquitoes discover you with enthusiasm. You learn that a whole afternoon of gathering can vanish into one modest kettle. Still, that kettle steams. It smells of greens, smoke, and faint sweetness from a handful of berries added because someone wants the children to smile. Researchers continue to disagree over how much foraged food contributed to settler survival compared with stored rations, hunting, trade, and help from local communities. Diaries often mention wild fruit with delight, but they may not record every handful of greens, every root dug in embarrassment, or every failed attempt to make a plant taste less like damp rope. The written record favours the memorable. Hunger lives in the repetitive. A woman may not write, "Today I boiled weeds again," because everyone already knows, and the page is needed for weather, deaths, births, prices, and the endless behaviour of oxen. You taste the soup as evening settles in. The greens are soft, the broth thin, the flavour earthy and slightly smoky. It is not delicious in the modern restaurant sense. No one is taking a picture of it from above, but it warms your mouth and gives your body something to work with. Around the fire, bowls pass from hand to hand. A child finds a berry at the bottom and looks briefly wealthy. Someone jokes that the meal tastes like the side of the trail, which is rude but not inaccurate. The danger remains. Some plants must be leached to remove bitterness. Some nuts need processing. Some berries are safe only in certain forms. Some roots can poison. Even familiar food can turn troublesome if gathered from stagnant water or spoiled in storage. The frontier lesson is not that nature provides like a kindly cupboard. It provides through knowledge, labour, timing, and caution. Without those, abundance can be a trap wearing leaves. As the light fades, you spread gathered plants on cloth to dry. You tie small bundles of herbs from the wagon frame. You tuck nuts into a sack. The motions are gentle, almost domestic, yet they feel like acts of resistance against emptiness. Tomorrow, the wagon will move again, and this patch of creekside green will be behind you. You cannot carry the whole valley. You carry only what your hands have learned to choose. Night comes with the smell of damp earth and cooling ashes. Your belly is not full, exactly, but it is quieter. You lie beneath the canvas and remember the shape of the leaves, the warning about lookalikes, the stain of berries on your thumb. The land around you is no longer blank. It is written in roots, seeds, fruits, and hazards, and you are learning, slowly, humbly, to read without pretending you wrote the book. The next day carries you into country where every trail seems to have been known before you arrived. The wagon wheels press into old paths. The creek bends past places where fires have burned for generations. Cottonwoods lean over banks where people have gathered, fished, traded, argued, rested, buried, celebrated, and moved on with the seasons. You are not entering an empty world. You are entering someone else's home, and hunger has a way of making that truth harder to ignore. Your own supplies are shrinking again. The flour sack has developed the tragic posture of a thing with little left to give. The bacon is nearly gone. The beans remain, because beans have the endurance of stubborn relatives. But even they are no longer enough. So when riders appear on the rise, or when a small native camp comes into view near water, your thoughts tangle together. Food, fear, hope, uncertainty, shame, perhaps, though you may not name it. The air is still. Smoke rises in a pale thread from cooking fires. You smell roasting meat, damp hides, wood ash, and something sweet you cannot place. Your stomach notices before your manners do. Nearby, women may be processing roots, drying berries, pounding seeds, scraping hides, or tending children. Men may be returning from hunting or watching the strangers with careful eyes. Dogs bark. Horses shift. A child peeks from behind an adult, curious and silent. Many native nations of the West had highly developed food systems long before settler wagon trains crossed the plains and mountains, depending on region. Communities hunted bison, deer, elk, pronghorn, and smaller game, fished rivers and lakes, gathered camas, choke cherries, acorns, pine nuts, wild rice, prairie turnips, berries, and greens, farmed corn, beans, squash, sunflowers, or melons, dried and stored food for winter, and traded across wide distances. This was not random wilderness snacking. It was deep ecological knowledge, shaped by season, ceremony, labour, and memory. You approach with caution because every encounter carries history even before anyone speaks. Sometimes food is traded peacefully. A little flour for dried meat, cloth for corn, ammunition for pemmican, coffee for fresh fish. Sometimes starving settlers receive direct help, given out of compassion, diplomacy, self-interest, or custom. Sometimes they are refused because resources are limited, trust has been broken, or the newcomers have already taken too much. Sometimes violence or fear has preceded the meeting, and a simple exchange of food becomes impossible beneath the weight of what has happened before. The old stories often make these meetings too simple. They turn native people into either rescuers in the background or threats on the horizon, which is convenient for a dramatic tale and useless for understanding real survival. In truth, you may owe your next meal to knowledge held by people whose land your presence is helping to transform. That is not a comfortable sentence. History is full of uncomfortable sentences, best not to sleep through all of them, though sleep is certainly trying its best tonight. You watch as dried meat is offered for trade. It may be bison, deer, elk, or another local game. Cut thin and cured by sun or smoke, it is light, portable, and precious. Pemmican, made in many plains cultures from dried meat pounded with fat and sometimes berries, is dense with energy and keeps well when prepared properly. To a hungry traveller it feels almost miraculous. A small portion can carry a body through cold, walking, and hard work far better than a watery pot of hope. An unusual detail from some plains accounts is that newcomers sometimes misunderstood pemmican at first, finding it strange, greasy, or too rich, only to appreciate it deeply once hunger and labour corrected their delicate opinions. Imagine turning up your nose at one of the most practical travel foods on the continent, because it is not arranged nicely on a plate. The frontier has many lessons, and one of them is that presentation matters less when your belt has become more decorative than functional. You trade carefully. Words may be shared through gestures, a mixed vocabulary, or an interpreter. Hands open, objects are shown. Suspicion moves in the spaces between people. You may offer a needle, a blanket, a tin cup, tobacco, or powder. You may receive corn, dried squash, berries, fish, or meat. Every item has meaning beyond usefulness. Trade can create obligation. It can signal peace. It can be remembered later, kindly or bitterly. Some settlers learn methods that keep them alive. How to dig certain roots without destroying the patch. How to roast bulbs in earth ovens. How to find water where the surface looks dry. How to prepare acorns so bitterness leaves them. How to follow bison without stampeding them into danger. How to dry meat properly so it does not rot in the wagon. Such knowledge is not a loose pile of tips. It belongs to cultures, families, and landscapes. To receive it is to receive more than instruction. A continuing question among historians is how often settler accounts minimized native assistance, because later frontier mythology preferred independence. Diaries sometimes record help plainly. Other times, assistance is folded into vague phrases like, Indians brought food, or Indians showed us the way, without names, context, or gratitude. The silence matters. It reveals not only what happened, but what people later wanted to remember. A nation built on self-reliance does not always enjoy admitting how often it survived on borrowed meals. There is also the harder truth that food exchanges took place amid expanding dispossession. Settlers needed provisions, roots, and safety. Native communities faced disease, military pressure, broken treaties, shrinking game, damaged grasslands, and the intrusion of wagons through hunting grounds and sacred places. A meal shared at sunset might be generous and real, yet still exist inside a larger story of loss. You can be thankful for the food and still recognize the wound around it. History can hold both at once, even if people prefer tidy cupboards. The campfire glows as dusk lowers itself over the river bottom. You sit with a strip of dried meat softening in your mouth. It is smoky, rich, and tougher than your jaw expected. A little corn is boiled into a thick mush. Someone has traded for berries, dark and wrinkled, their sweetness waking the tongue. The meal is simple, but it feels stronger than the thin stews of recent days. Your shoulders loosen. The children grow quiet in that blessed way children do when food finally reaches them. Nearby, native voices rise and fall in conversation you may not understand. Laughter breaks out, brief and warm. A drumbeat may sound in the distance, or perhaps only the steady tapping of work. Horses breathe in the dark. Sparks lift from the fire and vanish into a sky crowded with stars. You think of all the things you do not know, the names of plants, the old trails across hills, the stories tied to this bend of water, the proper time to burn grass, harvest roots, hunt, fish, store, move, return. You arrived hungry, carrying sacks and assumptions. The land has begun removing both, one meal at a time, before sleep. You tuck the traded food carefully into the wagon. Not much, but enough for tomorrow, enough to keep walking, enough to remind you that survival is rarely pure. It is tangled with exchange, gratitude, fear, misunderstanding, generosity, harm, and dependence. The fire sinks low, the river murmurs in the dark. You close your eyes, carrying the taste of smoke and berries, and the uneasy knowledge that the food which saves you may also reveal what your story has been leaving out. Snow changes the sound of hunger. On the trail, hunger creaks and rattles beside wheels, in a cabin. It becomes quieter, it sits in corners, it waits on shelves, it listens while wind presses against the walls and finds every crack with cold fingers. You wake beneath a quilt that smells faintly of smoke, wool, and the people who have slept under it for too many nights. Frost feathers the inside of the window. The fire has fallen low. Somewhere beyond the door, the whole world is white, still, and deeply uninterested in your breakfast plans. This is winter hunger, and it is different from trail hunger. On the road, you can tell yourself the next bend may bring water, berries, game, a trading post, a friendly farm, some blessed miracle with a chimney. In winter, the world closes, paths vanish, rivers lock under ice. Snow covers the roots and greens that once seemed like secret writing on the land. Hunting becomes harder. Livestock eat through hay. The cabin becomes both shelter and trap, which is an awkward arrangement, but at least it has walls. You sit up slowly. The air bites your nose. A child turns in sleep and coughs. Someone stirs the ashes, coaxing a coal into life with the patience of a saint and the expression of a person who would very much like coffee to appear by magic. It does not. Instead, there is a kettle, a little cornmeal, a strip of dried meat saved from better days, and perhaps beans soaking in a pot, still as stubborn as ever. Beans do not care about winter. Beans have the emotional range of pebbles. In many frontier settlements, winter survival depended on stored staples such as cornmeal, flour, beans, salt pork, dried fruit, dried vegetables, and preserved meat, along with fuel and fodder gathered before the cold set in. That is a plain fact. But inside it lives a season of labour. Every jar, sack, smoke joint, and dried string of peppers represents summer hands working ahead for January mouths. The garden patch you hoed in heat, the corn you shelled by lamplight, the apples you sliced and dried, the meat you salted while flies buzzed at the door. All of it has become this morning's small chance. A cabin in deep winter smells of everything at once: smoke, damp wool, boiled corn, leather, unwashed bodies, pine kindling if there is pine, sour bedding if the weather has trapped you inside too long. The scent is not pretty, but it is intimate. it means people are still breathing together. The walls may be rough logs daubed with mud, or boards that shrink and leave drafts. The roof may groan under snow, the floor may be packed earth, puncheon or rough planks. Every material has a temperature, and most of them seem to prefer cold. You cross to the shelf and check the food again. This becomes a ritual. You do not expect the sacks to refill, but you look anyway. Because humans are hopeful creatures and also very bad at leaving cupboards alone. The flour is low, cornmeal is lower, a crock of lard sits near the wall, guarded like treasure. A few onions hang from a beam, shriveled but alive enough to lend a soup dignity. There may be a pumpkin stored under the bed, because frontier decorating often involves hiding vegetables in surprising places. One odd little frontier habit was saving even small bits of grease, bones, and crusts with almost ceremonial care. Nothing that could flavour a pot was wasted if people were hungry enough. Bones might be boiled more than once, bacon rind could season beans, stale bread could thicken broth, coffee grounds could be reused until the drink became less coffee than brown encouragement. Modern comfort might call this thrift. Winter calls it not being foolish. Outside, the snow reflects a pale light through the window. You hear the axe from somewhere near the woodpile, a dull, steady chop. Fuel is food's quiet partner. Without fire, grain stays hard, meat stays frozen, water stays ice, and bodies lose strength. A family can have corn in storage and still suffer if there is not enough wood or dung or brush to cook it. In timbered places, wood gathering is backbreaking but possible. On treeless plains, settlers may rely on hay, brush, twisted grass, corn cobs, or dried animal dung. The fire does not care about romance. It burns what it is given. The meal begins as water. Many frontier meals begin as water in a pot. Cornmeal stirred slowly, salt if available, a shaving of dried meat, a spoon of grease if mercy visits. The mush thickens, steam rises and clouds your face. The smell is plain, warm, faintly smoky. The spoon moves through the pot with a soft scrape. Around the room, everyone notices, even sleep notices. There is a current disagreement among scholars about whether winter starvation in frontier communities was usually the result of isolation itself, crop failure before winter, market disruption, or the collapse of local support networks. The answer changes with region and year. A family snowed in after a good harvest is frightened but not helpless. A family snowed in after drought, insects, sickness, or a failed hunt is in another story entirely. Isolation magnifies whatever went wrong before the first snow fell. You eat from a tin bowl. The mush is hot enough to sting and bland enough to make you grateful for the sting. Each bite slides down and settles warmly. Nobody takes too much. The adults pretend not to watch the children's bowls, while absolutely watching the children's bowls. An elder pushes aside a portion with the casual lie of not being hungry. The room understands the lie. It lets it stand. Hunger has manners when pride is involved. Days become narrow. Morning fire, feed animals, break ice, cook, mend, haul wood, check traps, shake snow from the roof, count food, sleep early to save candles and strength. If someone has a cow still giving milk, even a little. She becomes almost a member of the household with hooves and excellent public relations. Milk can be drunk, soured, churned, thickened, shared with children, or used to soften coarse meal if the cow goes dry. The silence at the pail feels personal. Cabin fever is not only boredom, it is the mind rubbing against walls while the stomach rubs against emptiness. People grow irritable in whispers. Small sounds become large. The drip from thawing boots, the scrape of a chair, the wind in the chimney, the endless chewing of someone who has somehow made one crust last an entire lifetime. You remind yourself that patience is a survival skill, though not always an attractive one. Yet there is comfort too. A low fire paints the logs amber. A kettle ticks softly as it cools. Someone tells a story by memory because books are scarce and eyes are tired. A child falls asleep against your side. Warm and heavy, outside. The snow lies blue under moonlight, smoothing the rough yard, the fence, the woodpile, the path to the barn. For a moment, scarcity looks almost peaceful. That is winter's trick. It can be beautiful while it tests every shelf in the cabin. You bank the fire before bed. The last glow settles under ash. Tomorrow the pot will be filled again. If there is still meal, the soup will thin again. If water can be broken from ice, the door will open to the same white world, and you will step into it with a bucket, an axe, or a trapline, listening for any sign that the season has loosened its grip. Until then, survival is measured in warmth, spoonfuls, and the careful keeping of hope inside 4 smoky walls. By the time the snow loosens, or the trail dries, or the next stretch of hungry country opens ahead, you begin to understand that food does not become safe simply because you have found it. A deer on the ground, a basket of berries, a sack of apples, a row of cabbages, a fresh catch of fish. All of it starts changing the moment it is gathered. Heat works on it. Damp works on it. Flies discover it with the speed of gossip. Mold creeps in softly. Rot is patient. And on the frontier, rot has excellent opportunities. So you learn preservation, not as a quaint kitchen art, but as a daily argument with time. The morning smells of smoke and wet grass. A breeze moves across the camp, lifting the canvas flap and stirring ash near the fire. You sit beside a slab of meat laid on a rough board, knife in hand, while someone sharpens another blade with slow, ringing strokes. The sound is steady and oddly soothing. Scrape, pause, scrape, nearby. Thin strips of meat hang from a wooden frame over greenish smoke that curls and drifts into your hair. Your eyes water. Your sleeves smell like a chimney. Your stomach approves anyway. Preserving food before mechanical refrigeration depended on methods such as drying, salting, smoking, pickling, fermenting, rendering fat, and storing food in cool cellars or buried pits. That is one of the great practical truths of settler life. Freshness was a luxury that came and went quickly. Keeping food meant changing it into something less inviting to spoilage. Take away moisture, add salt, add smoke, add acid, seal it under fat, hide it from heat, confuse the tiny invisible enemies long enough to survive the season. Nobody around you uses modern microbiology to explain it. Of course, they use habit, inherited skill, smell, touch, and the ancient phrase, "that looks questionable." Meat is the most urgent teacher. Fresh meat is wonderful. But too much at once can become a disaster if it spoils. You cut it thin, because thick pieces hold moisture, and moisture invites trouble. You salt what you can. If salt remains, you hang strips in moving air or over a smoky fire. The smoke keeps insects away and adds flavour, while the drying makes the meat lighter and longer lasting. When done well, it becomes tough, dark, and concentrated, something you can tuck into a sack and chew while walking. When done badly, it becomes a lesson with a smell. Salt pork and bacon are frontier staples for a reason. Salt draws moisture from meat and slows decay. A barrel of salted pork may not inspire poetry, unless the poet is extremely hungry. But it can feed workers through weeks when hunting fails. Hams can be cured and smoked. Fish can be split and dried. Sausages can be made if there are casings, spices, salt, and confidence. Fat can be rendered into lard or tallow, poured into crocks, and used for frying, baking, lamps, soap, or emergency calories. Fat is not decorative out here. It is stored sunlight with manners. You watch lard being rendered in a heavy pot. Bits of fat melt slowly over low heat, turning clear and golden before being strained into a crock. The smell is rich and warm, filling the room or camp with a promise of future biscuits. Little browned pieces remain behind, crisp and salty. Someone calls them cracklings, and everyone suddenly becomes attentive. These scraps can be stirred into cornbread or eaten at once, preferably before a child with quick hands solves the matter. An odd detail from old household practice is that eggs were sometimes preserved in water glass, a solution of sodium silicate, or packed in substances such as salt, bran, lime water, or grease, depending on period and place. Not every family had the same materials, and results varied. But the idea was simple enough: seal the shell pores, slow spoilage, and keep a fragile springtime food into leaner months. Imagine looking at a jar of eggs and thinking, yes, chemistry, but in a bonnet. History does enjoy surprising us. Fruit carries its own kind of urgency. Apples can be sliced into rings and strung up to dry. Peaches, berries, and plums can be dried in the sun or near low heat. Some are stewed later into sauces or pies, if flour permits and morale requires ceremony. Berries can become preserves when sugar is available. Though sugar may be scarce or expensive, without sugar they can still be dried, mashed into cakes, or mixed with meat and fat in foodways settlers often learned from indigenous communities. Vegetables can be dried too. Corn is especially important. Ears can be dried, kernels shelled, meal ground later, beans, bless their stony little souls, dry beautifully and keep well if protected from damp and pests. There is continuing debate among food historians about how much frontier preservation knowledge came from inherited European traditions, how much was adapted from indigenous practices, and how much emerged from local necessity when old methods met new climates. The honest answer is braided. A woman might bring pickling habits from New England, smoking methods from German neighbours, drying techniques learned from native trade, and storage tricks invented after one very bad summer in a damp cabin. Survival rarely respects tidy cultural categories. It borrows, tests, remembers, and quietly discards what fails. Pickling is another weapon against hunger. Vinegar, brine, and fermentation help preserve vegetables, cucumbers, cabbage, beans, beets, onions, and sometimes fruits. A crock of sauerkraut or pickled vegetables can carry sharpness into months of bland food. That sharpness matters after endless meal, beans, pork, and mush. The tongue begins to dream of brightness. A bite of pickle can wake a whole supper, even if supper itself is mostly potatoes trying their best. Storage is as important as preparation. Cellars, if you have one, are cool and dark, good for roots, apples, crocks, and barrels in some places. Settlers dig pits lined with straw to store potatoes, turnips, carrots, or cabbages. Pumpkins and squash sit in dry corners. Onions hang from rafters. Herbs dry in bundles. Meat hangs high, safe from dogs if not always from mice. Everything must be checked. One rotten apple can spoil the others. Damp can ruin flour. Weevils can invade grain. Rats can treat your winter plan as a personal invitation. The work is relentless. But it has rhythm: slice, salt, hang, stir, skim, seal, turn, check. The body learns the motions. Hands smell of smoke, vinegar, onion, and fat. Hair keeps the scent of fire. Clothing absorbs the season. You may be tired, but there is comfort in seeing food arranged for the future strings of dried apples, sacks of beans, crocks of lard, jars of pickles, smoked meat hanging dark from beams. These are not decorations. They are promises made visible. At evening, you sit near the smoke rack while the sky fades lavender. A strip of drying meat bends stiffly between your fingers. It tastes smoky, salty, a little leathery, and deeply reassuring. Nearby, a pot of beans takes flavour from a saved bacon rind. Someone stirs cornmeal into the broth to thicken it. The meal is plain, but the smell is good enough to make everyone pretend not to hurry. You remember the thin soup of winter, the rabbit bones saved from the last hunt, the traded dried meat by the river, the berries stained on your thumb. Preservation ties those moments together. It is the art of saying. Not all of today must be eaten today. Some of today must protect tomorrow. Night settles, smoke drifts low, the racks creak softly in the cooling air. You lie down with the scent of curing meat in your blanket and the quiet satisfaction of food held back from decay. Hunger has not vanished. No, it waits as it always does. But for now, there is something stored, something drying, something sealed away against the next hard mile. By now, you have learned to look at every animal in camp with two thoughts at once. One thought is practical and affectionate. There goes the ox, patient as a church bench, pulling your wagon through mud and dust. There stands the milk cow, warm-eyed and slow, carrying a small universe of cream inside her. There scratch the chickens, fussing at the ground as if the entire frontier has been poorly organized for their convenience. The other thought is harder. Every animal is also food, or a way to reach food, or a living savings account that may have to be spent. This is the uneasy arithmetic of livestock on the frontier. Animals turn grass into movement, milk, eggs, manure, hides, wool, meat, and sometimes hope. They also require water, fodder, shelter, guarding, patience, and the emotional discipline not to shout at them when they behave like animals, which they insist on doing regularly. The morning opens with the smell of damp hay, warm hide, trampled grass, and smoke from the breakfast fire. You walk toward the oxen with a yoke over your shoulder. The wood is smooth where hands have handled it for months. One ox flicks an ear, another exhales into the cold air, a grassy cloud puffing from his nostrils. These creatures are not glamorous. They do not prance. They do not toss their manes in paintings. But in many overland journeys, oxen were preferred over horses or mules because they were strong, steady, less expensive, and could often survive on rough forage. Slow, yes, stubborn, certainly, but also dependable in the way that matters when your entire household sits on wheels behind them. If an ox dies, the loss is more than sadness. It can halt the wagon. It can force you to abandon goods, split loads, trade desperately, or fall behind the group. If a cow dies, milk disappears. If chickens are lost to foxes, weather, theft, or simple poultry foolishness, eggs vanish. If pigs wander or starve, future meat disappears. Livestock are not background scenery. They are part of the food system, walking beside you. You milk before full daylight when there is a cow still giving. Your hands are cold, the pail is colder, and the cow swats you with her tail because she has her own opinions about history. The milk strikes the tin with a soft ringing sound. Warm and white in the dimness, fresh milk can feed children, soften coarse bread, enrich mush, or be turned into butter, clabber, cheese, or buttermilk when conditions allow. A little cream stirred into thin cornmeal can transform it from punishment into breakfast. Not fine breakfast, perhaps. Let us not get carried away, but breakfast with dignity. In settled homesteads, cows become central to survival. They graze where possible, eat hay in winter, and convert rough plant matter into daily nourishment. But keeping them alive through hard seasons is its own labour. You cut hay in summer heat, stack it against rain, guard it from rot, and pray it lasts. A harsh winter can turn hay into treasure, too little fodder, and the animals weaken just when you need them most. Hunger then spreads from humans to barns and back again. Pigs are different. Pigs are opportunists, which is a polite word for creatures who eat with impressive moral flexibility. On many farms, they consume scraps, mast, roots, fallen fruit, corn, and whatever else their snouts can locate. In return, they provide pork, lard, bristles, and hides. A fat hog butchered in late autumn can mean smoked hams, salt pork, sausages, cracklings, and crocks of lard for the winter. The whole household feels the event, the work is heavy, the smells are strong, and nobody with sense wastes much. Even the squeamish become practical when January is waiting. Chickens bring smaller miracles, eggs, if the hens are laying, meat, if needed, feathers, alarm, because chickens do love announcing emergencies, real or imagined. They scratch around cabins and camps, eating insects and scraps. Their eggs are fragile wealth. A few eggs can enrich bread, thicken custard, bind cakes, or feed an ill person. Yet hens may stop laying in cold or stress. Predators take them. Children may grow attached. The frontier kitchen then becomes a place where affection and appetite stare at each other over the same bird. A lesser known but very real frontier habit was using animals as living storage, instead of carrying all food as sacks and barrels. Families sometimes moved with creatures that could reproduce, graze, and provide food along the way. In theory, this is wonderfully clever. In practice, a pig does not always agree to travel in an orderly fashion. Chickens require protection. Cows slow the pace. And goats, where present, conduct themselves like tiny criminals wearing beards. Still, the idea is sound. A live animal can become milk today, manure for a garden, meat later, and trade value when cash is nearly imaginary. There is lively discussion among rural historians over whether livestock made frontier households more independent or more vulnerable. Animals created food, power, and wealth, but they also tied families to fodder supplies, water access, pasture, disease risks, predators, and market pressures. A family with animals could endure scarcity better in one season and suffer worse in another if drought stripped the grass or winter ate through hay. A cow is comfort. Yes, but also responsibility with hooves. You feel that responsibility most sharply at dusk. The animals must be gathered, watered, checked, and guarded. Wolves, coyotes, bears, thieves, storms, sickness, and simple bad luck all circle the edges of the barnyard or camp. A calf with a cough is not a minor inconvenience. A lame ox can change a route. A missing horse can turn a journey into an argument with gravity. You run your hand along a flank, feeling ribs beneath hide, reading condition with your palm, too thin, warm enough, breathing steady, you learn to notice. Food for animals competes with food for people. Corn might feed a pig, but it might also make meal for children. Milk might go to butter for sale, or to a sick elder, or into breakfast. A hen might be kept for eggs, or stewed because the pot is empty. These choices are not made once. They return daily, wearing different weather. It is no wonder frontier people often kept careful mental lists of who was producing, who was eating, and what could be spared. The barnyard was a ledger written in feathers, hides, and feed. Tonight, the camp quiets round the animals. The oxen lie down like dark mounds near the wagons. The cow shifts her weight and chews with steady satisfaction, somehow making survival sound like slow grinding. A chicken mutters from a crate, displeased with the accommodations. You sit near the fire with a cup of watered milk and a piece of bread softened in it. The taste is mild, faintly sweet, almost gentle after smoke, salt, and beans. Gentleness itself feels like nourishment. You remember the ration box, the silent hunting grounds, the creekside greens, the smoked meat, and the native tray that taught you how much you did not know. Now the lesson comes with breath and body heat. Food is not always stored on a shelf. Sometimes it stands in the twilight, flicking flies from its ears. Sometimes it scratches in dust. Sometimes it pulls your wagon another mile while asking only for grass, water, and a patience you may not always possess. As night deepens, you listen to the animals breathing. Their sounds mingle with insects, embers, and the low murmur of tired people. The frontier feels less empty this way, less silent. Around you are lives that support your own. And that dependence is both comforting and heavy. Tomorrow, you will yoke, milk, feed, count, coax, and guard them again, for now. The fire glows, the pail is rinsed, the animals rest, and hunger waits beyond the circle of warm, living breath. By the time hunger has followed you through enough mornings, you begin to understand why cheerful pioneer stories leave certain meals out. The memory of warm biscuits, smoked ham, ripe berries, and golden corn looks lovely on a painted calendar. The memory of chewing leather does not sell nearly as well. Yet the frontier was not built only on stews and heroic hunting. It was also built on the strange, stubborn, unglamorous foods people reached for when ordinary food had slipped away. You feel that truth one grey afternoon when the wind turns sharp and the wagon camp grows quiet. Quiet, not peaceful. There is a difference. Peaceful silence settles after a good meal. Hungry silence listens to every stomach. The fire smokes low. The ration box has been opened, searched, closed, opened again, and searched with the deep spiritual seriousness of someone expecting flour to appear through moral effort. Nothing appears. Even the beans are nearly gone, which feels like betrayal from a food famous for loyalty. So your eyes drift to things that yesterday were not food. A scrap of hide, a strip of rawhide lacing, a tallow candle, bark on a tree, weed seeds shaken into a cloth, a handful of acorns, bitter unless treated, a lump of old grease at the edge of a pan. The body is very persuasive when empty. It begins writing new definitions, not delicious. Perhaps, but chewable, not proper. Certainly. But possible, in desperate conditions. Possible can look almost generous. Records from frontier journeys and settlements show that people in severe scarcity sometimes turn to emergency foods, such as boiled hides, leather, bark, roots, grass seed, tallow, bone broth, and whatever edible scraps could be recovered. These were not everyday preferences. They were last choices, often remembered with embarrassment, grim humour, or silence. You do not boast in later life that you once simmered a bootlace unless the audience is close. The fire is warm, and everyone understands the difference between comedy and fear. Leather and rawhide are among the famous desperate foods. A strip cut from a worn moccasin, harness, or hide covering can be scraped, soaked, boiled, singed, and chewed. It may soften, it may not. It may produce broth with the emotional depth of wet rope. But if the hide was not treated with harmful chemicals, and if hunger is sharp enough, it offers something to the jaw and perhaps a little nourishment from remaining tissue or gelatin. Mostly, it offers the feeling that you are doing something, and doing something matters when helplessness presses close. You sit near the fire and watch a piece of hide curl in boiling water. The smell is smoky, animal, damp, and faintly sour. Nobody calls it supper with enthusiasm. Someone jokes that the ox provided transportation and now, in spirit, seasoning. It is not a good joke. But hunger lowers the standard for comedy too. The pot bubbles, steam rises. You wait because waiting is half of frontier cooking, especially when the ingredients are trying to remain equipment. Tallow candles occupy a similar grey place between object and food. Tallow is rendered animal fat, and fat is precious energy. A candle made of tallow might be shaved, melted, or used to grease a pan if there is nothing else. Of course, it may taste of smoke, wick, dust, and regret. Still, in hard times. A candle is not only light, it is calories standing upright. One strange note from several hard time accounts is that people sometimes joked about whether they were eating supper or burning it, because tallow could do both. That is frontier efficiency if one is feeling generous, and a little depressing if one is being honest. Bark and inner bark belong to another category. Some tree inner barks contain starches or can be dried, ground, and mixed into meal, though the usefulness varies by species and preparation. Indigenous communities in different regions had long-known ways to use certain barks, cambium, and tree foods in particular circumstances. Settlers, however, often lacked that knowledge and might scrape trees in desperation without understanding what was helpful, harmful, or simply pointless. The result could be bitter cakes, stringy mush, or a hard lesson in botanical humility. Then there are seeds, grass seeds, dock seeds, amaranth, pigweed, wild grains, and other small harvests can be gathered if you know them and if the season agrees. But gathering enough is slow work. You sweep seed heads into a cloth, shake, winnow, grind, and mix the result into porridge or cakes. Dust rises, chaff sticks to your sleeves. The meal tastes earthy, sometimes nutty, sometimes like the trail has been finely powdered and served warm, yet small seeds add up. A handful here, another there, a little meal thickening a pot. Survival often arrives not as a feast, but as accumulation. Insects appear in the record too, though settlers rarely celebrated them in polite memory. Grasshoppers, crickets, and other insects were eaten in many cultures around the world, and indigenous foodways in North America included insects in some places and seasons. Settlers facing hunger might roast or fry them, especially after swarms had destroyed crops with spectacular rudeness. The modern listener may shudder, but roasted insects can provide protein and fat. Also, after watching grasshoppers eat your field, eating them back may offer a tiny sense of justice. Not much, but the frontier takes its victories where it can. Academic writers continue to ask how often these emergency foods were actually eaten, since shame and later family storytelling may have hidden the worst details. Diaries can be frank, but they can also be selective. A person might record the death of an ox, the weather, and the miles covered, while leaving out the evening spent boiling hide because that memory felt too low, too frightening, or too hard to explain to descendants who preferred brave portraits over hungry pots. Silence in a source is not always absence. Sometimes it is embarrassment folded shut. You taste the hide broth. It is hot, thin, and faintly greasy. It has almost no flavour except smoke, salt if anyone spared it, and the knowledge that nobody would choose this twice unless forced. Still, it warms the throat. A few softened shreds can be chewed slowly. The jaw works. The stomach receives the message, however modest. Around the fire, people eat without much speech. This is not a meal for storytelling yet. Later, perhaps, tonight, it is simply survival. Emergency foods also change how people think about waste. After you have considered a candle as supper, you do not throw away bacon rind casually. After bark tea and leather broth, you treasure crumbs. Bones are cracked if possible, boiled again, saved again. Flour dust at the bottom of a sack is shaken into a cup. Grease is wiped with bread. Then the bread is eaten with ceremony. The world grows smaller, but attention grows larger. And yet, there is a strange tenderness in these hard meals. Someone gives the softest piece to a child. Someone pretends the broth is stronger than it is. Someone hums while stirring, because silence has become too heavy. Someone says that when this is over. They never want to see another boiled strap again, and for one brief moment laughter rises through the smoke. Thin laughter, yes, but real. Night settles over the camp. The pot is empty, not satisfyingly empty, but empty because every usable drop has been taken. The wind moves through the grass with a dry whisper. You wrap your blanket tighter and feel hunger still there, curled beneath the ribs, but quieter than before. You have crossed another day by eating what respectable memory would rather forget. Tomorrow may bring roots, fish, trade, game, or nothing at all. The frontier has not promised kindness, but now you know something essential. Survival is not always dignified. It is often smoky, chewy, bitter, and faintly absurd. It may taste like bark, leather, or melted candle. It may come with a joke nobody would tell at a dinner party, and still, if it keeps breath in the body until morning, it belongs in the story. By the time the road bends toward a trading post, the word store has begun to glow in your mind like a lantern. Store means flour. Store means coffee that has not already been boiled into a sad brown memory. Store means salt, meal, sugar, tobacco, needles, powder, lead, cloth, maybe dried fruit if the merchant is blessed, ambitious, or cruel enough to price it beyond reason. Store means choice, and after weeks of scraping the bottom of sacks, choice feels almost indecent. You smell the place before you fully see it. Wood smoke, horse sweat, old hides, damp wool, tobacco, spilled molasses, and the sharp mixed scent of people who've arrived from many directions carrying dust, news, complaints, and hunger. The building may be a rough log structure near a river crossing, a supply station beside a trail, a sutler's shop near a fort, or a merchant's room in a young settlement where shelves lean under barrels and crates. To your tired eyes, it appears a civilization condensed into nails, flour, and arguments about price. You step inside and blink in the dimness. Light enters through a small window and catches dust floating above the counter. Barrels stand along the wall. Flour sacks are stacked near a scale. Coffee beans sit in a bin. Dark and fragrant enough to make you briefly emotional. There are bolts of cloth, iron tools, salt, maybe rice, dried apples, beans, candles, soap, tobacco, cartridges, and tiny luxuries that suddenly look dangerous. Peppermint sticks, a bit of tea, a tin of peaches. Your stomach and your common sense begin a quiet wrestling match. Trading posts and general stores were vital supply points for settlers, freighters, miners, soldiers, ranchers, and native customers across much of the western frontier. Many families could not survive solely on what they carried, hunted, gathered, or raised. They depended on stores for salt, flour, ammunition, tools, seed, coffee, cloth, and replacement gear. But access was uneven. A store might be many days away, it might be out of stock. Prices could rise brutally when roads were bad, freight costs high, or demand desperate. The frontier market had a calm little way of reminding hungry people that distance is expensive. You ask the price of flour. The merchant tells you. You do not gasp, because dignity is important. But your soul briefly leaves your body, checks the shelf, and returns disappointed. Freight has to be paid, goods travel by wagon, boat, pack train, rail where rails exist, and sometimes by pure stubbornness. Every mile adds cost. A barrel of flour bought cheaply in the east may become precious by the time it reaches a remote mining camp or isolated settlement. Coffee, sugar, and salt carry the taste of labour long before they reach the tongue. If you have cash, you count coins carefully on the counter. If you do not, and many do not, you ask for credit. Credit is a soft word with hard edges. The merchant writes your name in a ledger, noting what you owe for flour, bacon, seed, powder, nails, or cloth. Perhaps you promise payment after harvest, perhaps after wages from freighting or mining, perhaps after selling hides, butter, eggs, or livestock. The ledger becomes a shadow pantry, feeding you now while waiting to bite later. There is an old and slightly uncomfortable detail about frontier storekeeping. Some merchants accepted payment in goods that were not money at all, such as hides, furs, eggs, butter, firewood, labour, or future crops. A family might carry in a sack of dried beans, a bundle of pelts, or a few dozen eggs and leave with salt, coffee, or calico. The store could function as bank, gossip exchange, post office, supply room, news centre, and judgment chamber. You might go in for meal and come out knowing who married badly, whose cow died, and whether war, weather, or taxes were ruining everyone's mood this week. The storekeeper is not always a villain. Though hungry customers may feel tempted to nominate him, he faces his own risks. Goods spoil, shipments fail, debts go unpaid, thieves arrive, floods rise, and customers complain with the confidence of people not managing a supply chain by mule. Some merchants exploit scarcity, others extend credit they can barely afford to give. Many do both at different times, because human beings are complicated and ledgers encourage moral flexibility. You stand near the counter while others bargain. A miner wants flour and coffee on credit against a claim that may never produce gold. A ranch hand asks for cartridges and tobacco. A native trader examines cloth. A woman calculates whether to buy salt or needles, because holes in clothing also become survival problems when winter comes. A child stares at candy with the silent intensity of prayer. The merchant weighs beans on a scale, the little metal weights clicking softly. That click is the sound of supper becoming debt. Specialists in Western economic history still puzzle over how much store credit helped families endure food shortages, and how often it trapped them in cycles of dependence. Both things can be true. Credit could keep a household alive through a failed crop, a long winter, or a delayed wagon train. It could also bind settlers to merchants, freight companies, crop buyers, or local elites who controlled prices and terms. Survival bought on credit might later be repaid with harvests, labour, land, or a level of worry that never quite left the pillow. You buy what you can. Flour first, salt, if you're wise, coffee, if morale has voting rights, which it absolutely does, beans, perhaps, though nobody cheers, a little sugar if there is room in the budget and mercy in the room, maybe a side of bacon, wrapped in paper that turns translucent with fat. You lift the sacks and feel their weight with gratitude and dread. Food is heavy again. Heavy is good. Heavy means tomorrow. Heavy means the wagon will complain. But let it. The wagon complains when empty too. Outside. You load the supplies carefully. Flour must be kept dry. Salt protected. Coffee tucked away from damp and theft. Bacon hung or packed where air can reach it and dogs cannot. Someone tears a small corner from a sugar paper and touches a crystal to the tongue. The sweetness is so bright it seems to ring, for a second. The entire trail becomes quiet around that tiny luxury. The post also brings information. Another kind of food. Which road is passable? Where grass has failed? Where there is water? Which creek has fish? Whether a fort has supplies, whether a settlement ahead is suffering or thriving. News moves through stores like wind through grass. You listen, because a rumour can save or mislead. A man says game is plentiful beyond the ridge. Another says the same country is stripped bare. Both sound certain. Certainty is cheap. Flour is not. Evening finds you camped near the post. Close enough to hear voices and the clatter of harness from late arrivals. Supper's better than it has been. Fresh flour thickens the gravy. Bacon fat shines on beans. Coffee smells deep, bitter, and almost holy. You hold the cup in both hands and breathe it in before drinking. Modern comfort has made coffee casual, out here. It is ceremony in tin. Yet relief sits beside unease. The ledger remembers, the money is lighter. The distance ahead remains. A store can save you, but it cannot remove the country beyond its door. Tomorrow, the road will stretch out again, and the sacks that feel full tonight will begin their slow collapse into emptiness. Still, for now. The fire is warm, the pot is generous, and the smell of coffee drifts into the dark like a promise you are just tired enough to believe. You lie down, hearing the murmur of trade continuing somewhere beyond the wagons. Coins, credit, barter, gossip, hunger, hope. All of it passes across rough counters under dim light. Survival, you realize, is not only found in wild routes or lucky hunts. Sometimes it waits behind a counter, measured by the pound, written in a ledger, and carried away in sacks you pray will last. By the next day, the food you bought at the trading post is no longer simply supplies, it becomes work. Flour does not turn itself into bread. Beans do not soften out of courtesy. Bacon does not slice itself thin enough to make one strip seem like three. The sacks and parcels ride in the wagon with the quiet dignity of treasure. But treasure is useless until hands measure it, guard it, cook it, stretch it, and make sure nobody tips it into a creek while pretending they had everything under control. And very often, those hands are women's hands. You see them before dawn, when the camp is still bluish and cold. A woman bends over the fire, coaxing flame from coals under a pot blackened by many mornings. Another kneads dough in a pan balanced on her lap. Someone shakes flour from a sack with such care that even dust is not wasted. A girl carries water in a pail that knocks against her knee. An older woman sorts beans by touch, flicking out stones, shriveled ones, and whatever mysterious little object has joined the bag without invitation. This is the labour that keeps people alive, and it rarely looks heroic in the usual frontier paintings. No horse rears beneath it, no rifle gleams in sunset. It is quieter than that. It is the scrape of a knife along a rind, the rhythmic thump of meal being pounded, the soft slap of dough, the hiss when batter meets hot grease, the steady mending of a torn sack before flour leaks away. It is arithmetic done by instinct, with a spoon, a palm, a glance at the children, and a memory of how far the next settlement lies. A well-documented reality of 19th century frontier households is that women's domestic labour included cooking, gardening, dairying, preserving, sewing, nursing, washing, childcare, and food management, often alongside field work, animal care, and travel duties. The word domestic can make this sound small, as though survival stayed politely indoors, but on the frontier, the household was an economic engine. The kitchen, if there was one, was a workshop. The garden was a pantry in progress. The milk pail was finance. The needle protected warmth. The cookpot rationed life. You walk beside one woman as she plans supper while still clearing breakfast. She knows how much flour remains because she felt the sack that morning. She knows which child needs more because the child has gone pale and quiet. She knows whether the cow gave less milk, whether the yeast is weak, whether the bacon is turning, whether the cornmeal has damp in it, whether the beans must be started now or there will be no meal by dark. Her mind holds a map of hunger with more detail than any trail guide, and still she's expected to keep moving. On the overland trails, women often cooked before wagons rolled and again after they stopped. They packed bedding, tended children, washed when water allowed, cared for the sick, gathered fuel, helped with animals, and sometimes drove teams or walked for miles if a family had a baby. The labour multiplied with almost comic unfairness. The baby requires milk, warmth, washing, and soothing. The trail offers dust, jolting wheels, cold mornings, and everyone pretending this is a reasonable environment for infancy. It is not. But history is full of babies arriving in unreasonable circumstances. The cooking itself is a kind of invention. You have flour, water, salt, grease, perhaps sour milk, perhaps a little baking soda if supplies are kind. From this comes bread, biscuit, dumpling, pancake, ash cake, thickener, paste, crust, and occasionally a loaf that could defend a cabin door. You have beans, and from them comes soup, stew, mash, filler, and another conversation about beans. You have scraps, bones, rind, onion tops, wild greens, milk, meal, and maybe a handful of dried fruit. A good cook does not create abundance from nothing. Exactly. She creates the feeling of a meal from fragments, which is nearly as miraculous and much more tiring. One curious detail from frontier diaries and reminiscences is how often women judged one another by bread. Good bread suggested order, competence, and moral reliability, while bad bread could become family legend in the most unfair way. Never mind that flour might be damp, yeast dead, fuel poor, pans inadequate, and the cook half asleep after tending a feverish child. If the biscuit came out heavy, someone remembered. This is why the past, if it appears at your door, deserves a firm talk about expectations. Gardens are another quiet battlefield. Once settlers stop travelling and build cabins, women often help plant and tend kitchen gardens near the house. Beans, corn, squash, pumpkins, potatoes, onions, cabbages, herbs, peas, turnips, and medicinal plants may all appear, depending on region, seed, water, and luck. A garden is not picturesque when you're hungry. It is a calculation against winter. Every seed asks for labour before it gives anything back. Every rue needs water, weeding, protection from insects, animals, hail, heat, and the cheerful chaos of children stepping where they should not. Researchers continue to differ on how much women's food labour has been underestimated because written frontier history long favoured male adventure. Land claims, battles, mining, and cattle drives. Many family papers reveal the balance more clearly. Women preserved food, traded eggs and butter, managed poultry, stretched meals, shared recipes, and formed neighbourhood support networks. Yet public memory often hands the spotlight to the man with the rifle, as if the rifle also baked bread, dried apples, delivered babies, and knew when the milk had soured. It did not. The rifle mostly leaned in a corner looking important. You feel the truth of that during an illness. Someone in the wagon train takes fever. Appetite fades. Strength leaves. Suddenly food must change. Broth must be made thin and warm. Cornmeal gruel must be smooth. Tea from herbs might be brewed. A sick child may need milk saved from others. A nursing mother may need extra food when extra food is hardest to find. Caregiving consumes fuel, water, time, sleep, and emotional strength. It is survival inside survival. At evening, you watch a woman divide supper. Her hands move with calm precision. A ladle for one bowl, a little less for another adult. More for the child who walked all day. Broth poured over old bread for the elder whose teeth ache. Nobody announces the strategy. It simply happens. The pot seems larger because she understands how to make liquid carry flavour, how to use fat without wasting it, how to hide scarcity beneath routine. She sits last. Of course, not always, not every woman, not every household, but often enough to become a pattern. By the time she eats, the food is cooler. The firelight softens the faces around the meal. The bread is rough but warm. Beans are flavoured with bacon rind rescued from the edge of respectability. A spoonful of dried apples has been stewed into a thin sauce, and the children receive it as though civilization has returned in a bowl. Someone compliments the meal. The woman shrugs, but her mouth almost smiles. You realise then that months without steady food were not survived by toughness alone. They were survived by management, by memory, by cooking knowledge, by hidden labour, by the ability to turn inconvenience into supper and disaster into a thinner supper. Women carried recipes in their heads, but also weather signs, family needs, preservation methods, neighbourhood debts, and the delicate politics of who could bear hunger for one more day. Night comes, the pans are scraped, grease is saved, beans are set to soak for tomorrow, because tomorrow has already begun in the mind of the person responsible for feeding everyone. The camp grows quiet, and the stars open above the wagons. You lie down with the smell of smoke and bread in your hair, understanding that the frontier kitchen, whether under canvas or inside a cabin, is not a background scene. It is the centre of endurance, glowing low beside the trail, one careful spoonful at a time. By the time hunger settles into a family, it stops being a private feeling. It moves from body to body like weather inside the wagon. You hear it in the way children grow quiet before supper. You see it in the way an elder stands slowly, one hand pressed to the table or wagon wheel. You feel it in the careful silence of adults who are pretending not to count every bite. Scarcity is never divided equally. No matter how fair people wish to be, it finds the small, the old, the sick, and the exhausted first. You walk beside the wagon in the afternoon heat, dust lifting around your boots and sticking to the sweat at your neck. A child trudges near you, dragging a stick through the dirt, no longer asking when you will stop. That is how you know the day has grown hard. A hungry child asking questions is tiring. A hungry child asking nothing is frightening. The oxen pull on, slow and patient, while the canvas cover snaps faintly in the wind. Somewhere inside the wagon, the food box bumps with each rut, light enough now to sound hollow. Families on the 19th century frontier often travelled or settled in mixed-age households, with infants, children, pregnant women, older relatives, and ill family members all depending on limited food, water, shelter, and labour. That is not a dramatic legend. It is an ordinary fact with heavy consequences. Survival was not simply a question of whether a strong adult could walk another 10 miles. It was whether the toddler could keep down thin porridge, whether grandmother could chew dried meat, whether the nursing mother had enough strength, whether the feverish boy could be coaxed to swallow broth, whether the baby would cry through another night because milk was failing. You notice how meals change around need. The youngest children may receive the softest bread soaked in milk if there is milk. Elders may get broth instead of tough meat. A pregnant woman may be urged to take an extra spoonful, though she may refuse if she sees others watching. The strongest adults sometimes eat less, or claim they ate earlier, or busy themselves with the animals until bowls are nearly empty. These little deceptions are not always noble, and they are not always successful. Hunger makes liars of tender people. The sounds around supper are quieter now. The scrape of spoons against tin bowls, the faint hiss of steam from a thin stew, the sleepy creak of a baby's cradle or a wagon box used as one. Someone breaks bread into pieces so small they look ceremonial. A child watches the distribution with complete attention, learning arithmetic too early. One piece for you, one piece for me, a smaller piece for mother because she says she is not hungry, a larger piece for the little one because nobody says why. Children on the frontier worked as soon as they were able, and when food ran short, their labour and vulnerability became painfully tangled. They carried water, gathered chips or sticks for fuel, watched younger siblings, drove animals, picked berries, shelled corn, scared birds from gardens, and helped with endless small tasks that adults depended on. Yet growing bodies need food. A child who walks all day or works in a field cannot thrive on scraps and promises. The frontier like to praise sturdy children, but it also asks too much of them. There is a strange little detail in some family memories that children sometimes chewed wheat grains, parched corn, resin, or even bits of raw dough as treats when sweets were unavailable. Imagine calling a kernel of parched corn a treat with full sincerity. And yet, if you have not tasted sugar in weeks, the warm nuttiness of parched grain can feel like a festival. A spoon dipped into molasses, if any remains, becomes a moment remembered for years. Children keep joy alive in small, odd ways. They lick syrup from a knife, they hunt berries in hedgerows, they make games from gathering fuel. because childhood insists on entering even the hardest rooms. But hunger also teaches them fear. They hear adults whisper after bedtime. They see the flour sack folded flatter each day. They understand more than anyone wants them to. A girl may offer her bread to a younger brother. A boy may hide his own hunger because he has heard his father curse the empty larder. Children learn the weather of adult faces. They know when not to ask for more. Older people face another kind of trial. A tough strip of smoked meat is not kind to weak teeth. Long walks punish old knees. Cold seeps deeper, illness lingers. An elder who has survived wars, childbirth, crop failures, debt, grief, and the stubborn foolishness of relatives may now be defeated by a ration too hard to chew. So food is softened. Cornmeal is boiled longer. Beans are mashed. Bones become broth. Dried apples are stewed until they collapse. These preparations take fuel, water, and time, all scarce. But care makes its own argument. Some social historians question how often frontier families truly protected the vulnerable first. Since diaries usually present families as loving units, while hunger can produce tension, resentment, and harsh choices. The answer is uncomfortable because families are human. Many sacrificed deeply for children and elders. Some failed, some rationed according to labour, giving more to those who worked hardest. Some followed custom, feeding men first, or children first, or the sick first, depending on household, culture, crisis, and personality. Scarcity reveals values, but it also strains them until they creak. You feel that creak during a cold rain. Everyone is wet. The fire sulks under a damp wood. A pot of corn mush sits over reluctant coals, thickening slowly. The youngest child cries because the smoke stings and the meal is late. An older man snaps at him, then looks ashamed. The mother says nothing, only stirs. The father steps away into the rain, perhaps to check the animals, perhaps to hide his face. Hunger has entered the family circle and taken a seat no one offered. Then, just as quietly, kindness returns. A shawl is wrapped around the crying child. The elder receives the first hot spoonful, not because anyone announces a rule, but because his hands are shaking. A teenager breaks a saved bit of dried apple and slips half to a little sister. Someone makes a joke about the mush being strong enough to patch a wagon wheel, and the child laughs through tears. The meal is poor, but the room, or camp, or dripping canvas shelter becomes bearable again. This is the social life of hunger. It is not only empty stomachs, it is negotiation, affection, discipline, embarrassment, pride, sacrifice, and sometimes unfairness. It is a mother watering milk so every child has some. It is a grandfather pretending broth is plenty. It is a boy walking behind the wagon so the younger ones can ride. It is a girl saving crumbs in a cloth, not for herself, but for the baby who wakes hungry before dawn. Night comes, soft and damp. The children sleep first, curled like commas under blankets. The elder breathes unevenly near the fire. Adults sit awake a little longer, counting what remains without opening the box again. Outside, the animals shift in the dark. Inside, if there is an inside, or beneath the wagon if there is not. The family holds together through one more lean day. You lie still and listen. A child sighs, someone whispers a prayer. The wind moves through grass with a sound like distant water. Hunger has not been solved, but it has been shared, and shared hunger is still hunger. Yes, but it is less lonely. Tomorrow, the road will ask again. The bowls will be filled as far as they can be filled. The smallest hands will reach, the oldest hands will tremble, and someone, somehow, will divide the meal with care. By the time you reach a mining camp, hunger has learned a new language. On the trail it spoke in ration boxes and empty flour sacks. In a cabin it whispered from shelves, "Here, It shouts over hammers, boots, wheels, curses, laughter, cards slapped on tables, and men insisting that tomorrow the claim will pay. Gold fever has a way of making people forget that bodies still require breakfast. The camp appears first as smoke and noise. Tents lean against the slope. Rough cabins cling to muddy streets. Pack animals stand hipshot beside stacked crates. A blacksmith's hammer rings through the cold air. Somewhere, someone is singing badly with great confidence. The ground smells of wet dirt, wood smoke, horse manure, frying grease, stale tobacco, and hope that has been handled by too many hands. Every person seems busy, restless, and hungry in some particular way. You walk past men carrying pans, picks, shovels, and bedrolls. Their boots are caked with mud, their faces are bearded, young, old, sunken, excited, exhausted. Some have crossed oceans, some have left farms, some have borrowed money, some have abandoned good sense so thoroughly that it may never find them again. They came for gold, silver, copper, or some glittering rumour that travelled faster than bread. And now they stand in a place where money may be imagined everywhere, but supper still arrives by mule, wagon, or luck during major Western mining rushes. Food prices in remote camps often rose sharply because supplies had to be hauled long distances over difficult roads, while sudden population growth outpaced local production. That simple fact explains a great deal of misery. A miner might stand near a stream where flakes of gold gleam in a pan, yet still pay outrageous sums for flour, beans, bacon, coffee, eggs, or fresh vegetables. Wealth under the ground does not automatically become bread on the table. There is always a mule between those two ideas, and the mule charges indirectly. You enter a cook tent where steam fogs the canvas. A long board serves as a table. Men sit shoulder to shoulder, eating quickly from tin plates, beans, bread, fried pork, coffee dark as resentment. The cook moves with speed and no softness, ladling stew, slicing bread, shouting at anyone who complains, in a mining camp. The cook may earn steady money while prospectors gamble with geology. This seems unfair until you remember that everyone must eat, and the mountain has not signed any promises. Food here is both necessity and business. Boarding houses feed men who can pay, saloons sell meals, drink and distraction, peddlers bring pies, dried fruit, canned oysters, pickles, coffee, and dubious sausages. Packers haul flour and bacon over passes where weather can turn profit into tragedy. A shipment delayed by snow can make prices leap. A road washed out can turn coffee into treasure. A rumour of a new strike can drain nearby stores as men buy supplies and rush toward a place that may contain more disappointment than ore. You stand beside a counter and watch a miner count coins. He buys flour, bacon, and coffee, then hesitates before a small pile of onions. Fresh produce is costly, but the body longs for it. Months of salted meat and bread can leave people weak in ways they may not fully understand. In many mining regions, lack of fresh fruits and vegetables contributed to illnesses linked with poor nutrition. People knew from experience that greens, potatoes, onions, fruit, and pickles help keep men feeling stronger. Even before modern vitamins had names polite enough for textbooks, the onions go into the miner's sack. He looks embarrassed. As if extravagance has overcome him, you almost congratulate him on romance. Mining camps also produce strange little luxuries. Canned foods become status objects when fresh food is scarce. A tin of peaches, oysters, sardines, or condensed milk might sell at a price that would make a farm wife laugh until she sat down. Yet men bought them for celebration, homesickness, or sheer craving. One curious detail from camp life is that oysters, packed in cans or transported in ice where possible, became popular in some inland western towns and camps. despite the obvious fact that the nearest ocean was having no direct relationship with dinner. Nothing says civilization like eating an oyster hundreds of miles from a tide pool and pretending this is normal. But hunger here is not only about prices, it is about time. A miner may work from dawn until dark, standing in cold water, swinging a pick, hauling rock, digging shafts, washing gravel, breathing dust. Cooking for oneself after such labour requires energy, tools, fuel, and skill. Some men are capable. Others consider boiling beans an advanced spiritual practice. Bad cooking wastes food. And waste in a mining camp is expensive. A pot left to burn can mean a day's earnings reduced to charcoal with ambition. So men form mess groups. They pool flour, bacon, beans, and coffee. One cooks while others work. They share a cabin or tent, divide costs, quarrel over portions, and accuse each other of eating more than agreed. A missing slab of bacon can break friendships faster than a disputed philosophy. Hunger sharpens suspicion. In camps where many are strangers, trust must be cooked slowly, like beans, and sometimes never softens. Economic historians continue to examine whether mining camps created opportunity for ordinary labourers or mostly transferred wealth to merchants, transporters, landowners, and companies. The answer depends on camp, period, and luck. Some miners struck rich, many did not. Yet the people selling shovels, flour, meals, boots, and credit often made steadier gains. The frontier dream says dig and rise. The ledger sometimes says sell biscuits to the diggers. You see this in the faces outside the assay office. One man grins, holding a pouch as if it contains sunrise. Another stares at dust on his boots, already calculating how long his food will last if the claim fails again. A third has nothing left but tools, blankets, and pride. He may sell a shovel for meal, or take wage work building a road, cutting timber, hauling water, cooking, washing clothes, or packing goods in mining country. Survival often means shifting from dreamer to worker without admitting the dream has cooled. Women in mining camps, though fewer in many early rushes, often found vital economic roles around food and domestic labour. Some ran boarding houses, cooked meals, baked bread, washed clothing, kept dairies, sold pies, preserved fruit, or opened small shops. Their labour could be more profitable than a poor claim. You pass a woman lifting loaves from an oven, her face flushed by heat, her sleeves dusted white. Men line up for bread with a reverence they might deny later. She knows exactly what the loaves are worth. She also knows nobody argues well while staring at fresh crust. Evening lowers over the camp, turning mud silver and smoke blue. The mountains stand dark against the sky. From one tent comes the smell of frying potatoes, a smell so comforting it nearly makes people religious. From another comes burned beans, which produces a different kind of prayer. A saloon piano stumbles through a tune, laughter rises, then a cough, then the clink of tin cups. Somewhere, men are still working by lantern, because hunger and hope both dislike stopping. You sit on a crate with a bowl of stew bought for too much money. It is thick with beans, pork, onion, and perhaps a potato that has travelled farther than some kings. The first spoonful is hot and salty, the second tastes of smoke, the third tastes of relief. Around you, the camp pulses with appetite for food, wealth, news, home, status, escape. In mining camps, hunger is never just bodily. It becomes ambition with an empty stomach. As the fire burns lower, you think back to the wagon trail and its careful sacks, to winter cabins and women dividing mush, to children learning silence too soon. Here the same old need wears a louder coat. Men chase fortune while merchants weigh flour. Gold may glitter in pans, but beans still take hours. Silver may hide in rock, but coffee still arrives by freight. The body remains stubbornly practical amid dreams. Night deepens. The cook tent closes. The saloon brightens. The mountains hold their secrets. Somewhere, a man lies awake calculating ounces of dust against pounds of flour. Somewhere else, a woman counts the day's earnings from bread. You pull your blanket around you and listen to the camp mutter in its sleep. Tomorrow, picks will strike stone again, pans will swirl, ledgers will open, stomachs will ask their plain old question before any claim can answer. After the noise of the mining camp, the fields feel almost too quiet. You come down into farming country where cabins sit low against the wind, where fences run unevenly through grass, and where the hope of supper has been planted in rows. Here hunger does not arrive only by empty wagon box or overpriced flour. It rises from the soil itself when the soil refuses, when the sky closes, when insects descend, when all the careful work of spring turns brittle before autumn can bless it. You stand at the edge of a cornfield in July, and the leaves whisper dryly against one another. They should sound lush, full of sap and promise. Instead, they rasp like paper. The earth has cracked into hard plates. Dust gathers in the seams. The sun presses down with a white, steady glare, and the air tastes of heat and disappointment. A farmer walks between the rows, touching leaves as if taking the pulse of a sick child. Nobody says much. There are moments when talk feels wasteful. Settlers who tried to farm the western plains and interior valleys faced drought, hail, early frost, floods, crop diseases, and insect outbreaks that could ruin a year's food supply with terrifying speed. Corn, wheat, oats, potatoes, beans, pumpkins, and garden vegetables all depended on weather that did not care how far a family had travelled, or how many prayers had been placed beneath the pillow. A single bad season could turn a household from cautious comfort to rationing. 2 bad seasons could send people into debt, migration, hunger, or the bitter decision to slaughter breeding animals for meat. You kneel and crumble soil between your fingers. It falls apart like ash. The smell is not rich and damp, but flat, mineral, tired. The garden near the cabin is worse. Cabbage leaves droop. Beans cling to their poles with the exhausted attitude of old laundry. Potato plants yellow too soon. The pumpkin vines have collapsed in the heat, their broad leaves curling inward as if hiding from the sky. You remember the store ledger, the winter shelf, the careful drying of apples, and you feel how fragile every plan becomes when the rain does not come. Drought works slowly at first. A little less milk from the cow because grass is poor, fewer eggs because hens are stressed, a smaller garden, thin hay, wells dropping, creeks shrinking. Then the meaning deepens. Without hay, animals cannot winter. Without animals, there is no milk, no pulling power, no manure for fields, no future calves or piglets. The hunger of plants becomes the hunger of animals, then the hunger of people. Scarcity travels through a farm like a rumour. Except the rumour is true. Then come the grasshoppers. At first you hear them before you understand, a dry clicking, a faint pattering, like sleet made of wings. The sky shimmers. The fence posts seem to move. Insects settle on the field, the roof, the laundry, the wagon, the very handle of the hoe. They chew with a soft, relentless rasp. Leaves vanish. Stems are stripped. Garden beds become bare earth. People who have never seen such a swarm can hardly believe that mouths so small can produce ruin so large. 19th century settlers in parts of the Great Plains suffered severe grasshopper and locust plagues, including devastating outbreaks in the 1870s when Rocky Mountain locust swarms destroyed crops across wide areas. The insects ate grain, vegetables, fruit trees, cloth, leather, and even wooden tool handles when conditions drove them hard enough. Imagine waking to find not simply that your crop is damaged, but that the world itself appears to be chewing. It is a level of rudeness difficult to overstate. Families fought back with whatever they had. They swept insects into piles and burned them. They dragged sheets or boards coated with tar through fields. They beat pans, lit smoky fires, dug trenches, turned chickens loose, and prayed with a certain sharpness. Some methods worked a little, many did not. A swarm could be so vast that human effort looked almost comic against it. The insects arrived as weather and left as famine. One odd survival note is that some settlers, after grasshoppers ruined crops, tried eating the insects themselves, roasted, fried, or ground into meal. This was not a universal habit, and many people found the idea unpleasant, but desperation can revise the menu with impressive speed. There is even a grim little satisfaction in the reversal. If the grasshoppers have eaten your wheat, perhaps eating the grasshoppers is not revenge exactly, but it does have a certain frontier logic, very crunchy justice, if we must name it. Hail brings a different violence. One afternoon the air turns greenish and still. Clouds pile high, dark at the base, glowing pale at the edges. The wind drops, birds vanish. Then ice falls from the sky, hammering roofs, smashing squash leaves, shredding corn, bruising fruit, breaking windows, and sending animals bawling toward shelter. In a few minutes, a field can be reduced to ragged stalks. You stand in the doorway afterward while hailstones melt in the mud like little white insults. The air smells sharp, cold, and bruised green from torn plants. Frost is quieter, more elegant, if disaster can be elegant. In spring, it blackens seedlings overnight. In autumn, it arrives too early and kills corn before it ripens, pumpkins before they harden, beans before pods dry, potatoes before they finish swelling underground. You wake to silver on the grass and know before anyone speaks, the garden is gone, the season has closed its hand. Agricultural historians have long debated how much early settler crop failure came from unfamiliar climate and farming methods, and how much from the sheer volatility of Western weather. Both mattered. Some newcomers planted crops suited to wetter regions. Some ploughed fragile soils without understanding how wind and drought would behave. Some settled in places where rainfall varied so sharply that good years were misleading. Yet even skilled farmers faced hail, insects, frost, and drought beyond human control. Experience helps. It does not command the clouds. When crops fail, the household changes pace. Food once planned for winter is eaten early. Seed grain becomes a moral puzzle. If you eat it, you survive now but lose next year's planting. If you save it, someone goes hungry today. Livestock are sold, traded, or butchered. Men leave for wage work on roads, rail lines, ranches, mines, or other farms. Women stretch meals even thinner, preserve whatever remains, gather wild foods, trade eggs if any hens still lay, and keep gardens alive by carrying water in buckets that bite into the hands. The shame of failure sits heavily. People speak of weather, but they also speak of themselves. Did they plant too late, trust the wrong seed, move too far west, borrow too much, ignore advice? The land becomes a mirror, and a cruel one. You can do everything with care and still watch the sky undo it. That is a hard lesson for people raised to believe that labour and virtue should produce bread. Evening comes over the ruined field. The light softens, which feels almost unfair. A breeze moves through stripped stalks, making a dry clicking sound where leaves should have been. Near the cabin, a pot simmers with the last of the garden beans, some onion, and a little meal stirred in to thicken the broth. The smell is mild and smoky. Not enough, but something. Always that word again. Something. You eat slowly on the step while the children sit close. Nobody speaks much about winter, though everyone is thinking of it. The cow lows from the pen. The haystack is smaller than it should be. The sky above the western horizon glows pink, clear, and uselessly beautiful. You want to ask it for rain. You want to ask it for an apology. The sky offers neither. Still, tomorrow people will walk the field, gather what can be saved, cut damaged corn for fodder, dig the potatoes that survived, pick through fallen fruit, and count seed. They will write letters, borrow, trade, move, endure, or begin again. Hunger has come not because they were idle, but because the living world is powerful and the human margin is thin. You lie down that night smelling dust, smoke, and crushed leaves. In the dark, you hear insect again. Fewer now, hidden in grass beyond the yard. The sound is soft enough for sleep, but you know what small mouths can do. The land has taught another lesson. Months without food may begin long before the cupboard is empty. It may begin in a dry field under a bright sky, while the crop still stands, and every leaf is already whispering warning. After the dry field and the chewed-down garden, water begins to look like mercy. You hear it before you see it. A low murmur beyond cottonwoods, a hidden movement under the heat. The trail dips toward a river, and every person in the party lifts a little. Not with joy exactly, but with that cautious frontier feeling that joy should probably wait until the wagon has not tipped over. Water means drinking. Water means washing dust from your mouth. Water means animals lowering their heads and pulling life through their lips. And sometimes, if luck is feeling sociable, water means food. You step through willow shade where the air turns cooler and smells of mud, leaves, fish, and damp wood. Mosquitoes rise in a whining cloud, because no blessing comes alone. The river moves brown and slow near the bank, faster toward the middle, carrying foam, twigs, and secrets from places you will never see. Your boots sink into soft ground. Frogs plop away from the edge. Dragonflies stitch blue sparks above the reeds. A child whispers that something moved in the water, and everyone suddenly becomes interested in supper. Rivers and streams were essential to frontier survival because they supplied drinking water, travel routes, fish, waterfowl, edible plants, and fertile bottomland, while also creating hazards such as floods, disease, dangerous crossings, and spoiled camps. That is the plain truth of water in the West. It feeds and threatens in the same breath. A creek may save your cattle in the afternoon and rise overnight to steal your wagon. A river may offer fish beneath a surface that also hides quick mud, snags, current, and fever. You begin with fishing because it sounds easier than hunting. Fish, after all, are already in the water. They cannot run into the hills. This confidence lasts until your hook catches only weeds, your line tangles, and the fish continue living their private lives with insulting serenity. Still, people try. Hooks and lines are light enough to carry. Nets, where available, can be useful. Traps, weirs, spears, baskets, and improvised devices may bring food when skill and place align. A simple line baited with worm, insect, scrap meat, or dough can change an evening. You sit on the bank with a pole cut from a sapling. The bark feels slick in your palm. The line trembles in the current. Sunlight touches the water in broken pieces around you. The camp settles into waterwork. Someone fills buckets. Someone scrubs a kettle with sand. Someone kneels to wash clothing that will never quite be clean again. Only cleaner than before, which is a frontier category deserving respect. The oxen drink noisily, then stand in the shallows with the grave satisfaction of creatures who have found the best part of the day. When the first fish comes up, flashing silver and twisting hard, the mood shifts. It is not large. No one is composing songs, but it is real, and real food has a way of becoming beautiful. It slaps against the mud, gills opening and closing, tail beating a wet rhythm. Soon there are two more, then nothing for an hour, then a catfish drawn from a deeper pool, whiskered and offended. The children watch with wide eyes. The adults pretend they were not hoping quite so intensely. Fish must be cleaned quickly in warm weather. The smell is sharp and river-rich. Scales cling to fingers. Guts are buried or tossed far from camp unless you want every dog, raccoon, and wandering smell enthusiast in the district to visit. The flesh goes into a pan with grease if there is any, or into a pot for stew if there is not. Bones make broth, heads may be boiled. Nothing useful is dismissed without thought. Hunger has made you humble before even the smallest fish. There is a curious little frontier note that turtles, mussels, frogs, crayfish, and even water plants sometimes entered hungry meals, depending on region and custom. Turtles could be trapped or caught in muddy shallows, and their meat, though requiring effort, might enrich a stew. Mussels could be gathered from rivers, though safety depended on clean water and knowledge, which were not always available. Frogs brought delicate meat in places where people were willing to bother with them. Crayfish, small but flavourful, were the sort of food that makes you work hard for modest results. A very frontier arrangement. You turn over a stone near the stream and find crayfish darting backward like tiny armoured pessimists. A child shrieks with delight. Someone catches a few in a tin cup, and for a moment the day feels almost playful. Then the cup is added to the supper plan, because play and hunger share a narrow border out here. The stew later contains fish, a little meal, wild onion, and those small river creatures who did not expect to become history. Yet water can betray. Camps near streams may be damp, buggy, and unhealthy. Bad water can sicken people and animals. Settlers did not fully understand germs for much of the period we're imagining, but they knew from hard experience that some water made people ill. Stagnant pools, crowded camps, animal waste near drinking places, and decaying matter could turn a life-giving creek into a quiet enemy. Boiling water helped, though not everyone did it consistently, especially when fuel was scarce and thirst was immediate. The clear spring becomes prized. The muddy puddle becomes a negotiation with fate. Crossings are worse. A river that seems shallow at dawn may rise by noon from rain miles away. Wagons must be unloaded, floated, ferried, corked, roped, or dragged. Food sacks are wrapped and lifted high. Flour must not get wet. Salt must not dissolve. Bacon must not drift off like a greasy little tragedy. Animals panic. Wheels sink. People shout over the current. One slip can turn precious provisions into brown water and memory. Some specialists in Western migration studies continue to wonder whether rivers saved more settlers from starvation than they endangered through illness, delay, and loss of supplies. The answer changes with every crossing, every season, every group. A river full of fish and bordered with edible greens can sustain a camp for days. The same river in flood can halt travel until rations shrink dangerously. Water is never just scenery, it is decision. At dusk, the fire burns near the bank, far enough from the damp ground to hold its flame. The fish fry in a skillet, skin crisping, flesh turning white and tender. The smell is clean, smoky, and rich enough to draw everyone close. A pot beside it bubbles with fish broth thickened by cornmeal. Someone adds a handful of greens gathered from the wet edge, and the steam rises green and savoury. Your bowl is not full, but it is alive with flavours different from dried meat and beans. River food tastes of movement. You eat slowly while the water talks in the dark. Frogs begin their evening pulls. Mosquitoes whine near your ear with appalling confidence. The air cools. The animals shift and drink again. A child falls asleep against a rolled blanket, one hand still smelling faintly of mud and fish scales. The meal has not solved the future, but it has given the body a little strength and the mind a little rest. Before sleeping, you look toward the river. Moonlight lays a pale road across it. Somewhere under that moving surface, fish hold in the current. Mussels rest in gravel. Turtles press into mud. and roots drink quietly along the bank. The river is not kind. It is not cruel. It simply carries what it carries. And tonight, it has carried you one meal farther, leaving the river behind. You begin to notice another kind of lifeline drawn across the country. Not water this time, but roads, forts, stations, ferries, mail stops, and faint wagon tracks pressed into the earth by thousands of desperate and hopeful wheels. They are not always comforting to look at. Some are muddy scars, some are only two pale lines through grass. Some disappear at the worst possible moment, because apparently the road has decided to become philosophical. But these routes matter. When food runs thin, survival often depends on whether anyone can reach you, or whether you can reach them. The morning is clear and cold. Your boots crunch through a skim of frost. Ahead, the road climbs toward a low ridge where you can see farther than you want to. Brown grass, dark brush, a creek flashing in the distance, a thread of smoke near the horizon. Smoke means people, or at least it usually does, and people may mean food, warning, trouble, news, or all four in a wonderfully inconvenient bundle. You walk with the wagon, listening to harness leather creak and the slow breath of animals. Every mile feels like a question. Is there a fort ahead? Is there a settlement with grain? Has a supply wagon passed recently? Did the last storm close the road? Did anyone send word back in the scattered frontier? Information can feed you almost as surely as cornmeal. A rumour about a stocked post may save a party. A false rumour may lead them into emptiness with cheerful confidence, the most dangerous kind. Across much of the 19th century West, military forts, mail routes, stage stations, ferries, and later railheads formed uneven but important support networks for travellers and settlers. They did not exist everywhere, and they did not always have enough supplies, but where they operated, they could provide food, protection, medical care, blacksmithing, news and directions. A fort might hold flour, salt pork, beans, hard bread, coffee and livestock feed in its storehouses. A stage station might offer a meal, water, fresh teams, or a place to sleep beside strangers who snore like injured bears. A ferry could keep flour sacks dry by getting a wagon across safely. These are not glamorous gifts, but they are exactly the kind survival respects as you approach a fort. The first thing you feel is structure, a flag moving in the wind, buildings arranged with intention, corrals, storehouses, smoke rising from chimneys, men drilling, hauling, repairing, standing watch. The smell is different from a family camp. More horses, more leather, more iron, more boiled coffee, more institutional beans, which taste very much like private beans, but with added authority. Forts were built for military purposes, yet their presence often shaped local economies and food access. Contractors supplied them, farmers and ranchers sold produce, hay, and animals to them. Traders gathered nearby. Civilians came seeking work, protection, mail, or relief. Native communities also interacted with forts in ways that range from trade and diplomacy to coercion, surveillance, confinement, and conflict. So again, the meal on your plate may carry a complicated history. A biscuit can be simple in the mouth and not simple at all in the story. You arrive tired, with your ration box nearly empty again. Someone speaks with an officer, clerk, sutler, or storekeeper. The answer depends on rules, mood, stock levels, credit, charity, and whether your party looks merely hungry or dangerously desperate. Perhaps you can buy flour. Perhaps you can trade labour for rations. Perhaps a doctor gives broth to a sick child. Perhaps you're told there is little to spare because the supply train is late. Bureaucracy, you discover, is not improved by hunger. It merely becomes harder to listen to politely. There is a rather odd detail about some military rations that travellers encountered hard bread, often called hardtack, could last a very long time, which was useful. But it could also be so hard that people soaked it in coffee, soup, or water before attempting to chew. If not softened, it could threaten teeth with the calm confidence of building material. Insect infestation was common enough that soldiers developed a grim humour about knocking pieces on the table to dislodge tiny passengers. Nothing says comfort like breakfast that may need eviction proceedings. Still, hard bread fills the stomach, salt pork brings fat, beans bring endurance, if not excitement. Coffee restores morale to a degree that probably deserves its own monument. You sit near a low wall, or outside a supply building with a tin cup warming your hands. The coffee is bitter, smoky, and possibly strong enough to negotiate treaties. It tastes magnificent. Relief lines could also come from neighbours and settlements rather than official posts. When a wagon party was stranded by snow, flood, illness, or a failed shortcut, rescue groups sometimes went out with pack animals carrying flour, blankets, dried meat, or medicine. Nearby communities might collect food for a destitute family after fire, drought, crop failure, or sickness. Churches, ethnic associations, kin networks, and informal neighbour circles all helped people through scarcity. The frontier praised independence, yes, but it also passed the hat, sent the wagon, shared seed, and brought soup when pride allowed it. Historical geographers keep asking how much survival in the West depended on these networks of mobility, rather than on the isolated homestead or heroic individual. The evidence keeps pointing toward connection. Roads mattered, rivers mattered, postal routes mattered, forts, stores, ferries, ranches, missions, rail depots, and native trails all shaped who ate and who did not. A person alone with grit and no access to supplies could perish with admirable determination. A tired family near a route with passing wagons, nearby neighbours, and a known water source had chances. You feel those chances in the rhythm of traffic. A freight wagon groans past with barrels and crates, its driver wrapped in a coat, hat low, face weathered into permanent skepticism. He knows road conditions ahead. He knows which station has hay. He knows where a bridge is out, where a spring still runs, where prices have turned wicked. A mail rider may carry letters full of advice, requests, warnings, and promises of help. A stagecoach may bring passengers with money, newspapers, and gossip about supply shipments. Even bad news is useful if it arrives early. Of course, not every road rescues. Some routes become traps because too many people trust them. Cut-offs promise shorter travel and deliver longer suffering. Stations run out. Forts move or close. War, disease, political decisions, or broken agreements can change access overnight. Railroads later transform supply lines, but before rails reach a place, everything still depends on animals, wheels, weather and human reliability, a fragile recipe at best. At midday, you help unload a few sacks from a relief wagon sent toward families caught by early snow. The canvas cover is stiff with cold. Inside are flour, beans, blankets, dried apples, and coffee. The sacks thump against the ground with a sound more beautiful than music. Each one is a future meal. Each one means someone ahead may not have to boil leather or scrape bark. You lift a bag of flour and feel its weight pull at your arms, heavy again, blessedly heavy. The road continues, behind you. The fort settles back into routine, ahead. The tracks vanish over a rise. You carry food, yes, but also directions, warnings, and a scrap of paper naming the next reliable water. That little note may be as valuable as a pan of bread. It tells you where not to waste strength. It turns blank distance into a sequence of possible stops. Evening comes beside a road station where the walls lean. The roof leaks, and the stew smells better than the building deserves. You eat at a rough table with strangers, a soldier, 2 freighters, a woman travelling with children, a man who claims to know a shorter road and is immediately distrusted by everyone sensible. Bowls are passed, coffee poured, news traded. Someone mentions a family snowed in near a pass. Someone else says a supply train left 3 days ago. Plans shift quietly around the table. You lie down later on a straw mattress that pokes through the blanket like it has personal grievances. Outside, horses stamp in the dark. Inside, someone snores with tremendous civic commitment. Yet you sleep easier than you have in days, not because the world is safe, but because you're not entirely cut off. There is a road. There are people on it. Somewhere ahead, there may be another station, another fort, another wagon bearing flour through the cold. Hunger fears isolation. Roads do not cure hunger, but they trouble it. They let food move, news move, help move, and hope move. Slowly, awkwardly, sometime too late, but still, as your eyes close, you hear a wagon arriving in the yard, wheels grinding over frozen ruts, harness bells faint in the night. Another traveller, another story, another chance that someone has brought what someone else lacks. By now, you know that hunger is not only fought with food. That sounds suspiciously like something a person says right before serving a very disappointing supper. But stay with it. Hunger is fought with memory, ritual, warmth, smell, texture, habit, and the gentle trick of making a little seem like enough for one evening. The body needs calories. Yes, no one is arguing with the body. The body has excellent legal representation, but the spirit needs the feeling of a meal, and frontier cooks learn how to build that feeling from scraps. The day has been long, grey, and windy. Dust works into your cuffs. Cold slips beneath your collar. You come into camp with shoulders aching and hands smelling of rope, smoke, and animal hide. The food box offers no grand welcome. Flour, cornmeal, a little grease, a few beans, bones saved from yesterday, onion skins, dried herbs, and coffee so weak it may soon need encouragement from a friend. Still, the fire catches, a pot is set over it, and something in the camp changes as soon as water begins to steam. Cooking is a form of reassurance. It gathers people, it marks time, it says morning has begun, noon has paused, evening has arrived, and you have not yet surrendered to the cold, the road, or the empty shelf. Across much of frontier life, simple dishes such as cornmeal mush, ash cakes, johnny cake, bean stews, dumplings, salt pork gravy, sourdough bread, and bone broth helped families stretch scarce ingredients into meals that could feed workers and children through lean periods. These foods were not fancy, they were dependable, filling, flexible, and willing to accept whatever small flavour could be persuaded into the pot. You begin with bones, yesterday's rabbit bones, or pork bones, or a beef bone traded at the station, cracked if possible and simmered slowly. The pot takes on a faint richness. A little fat beads at the surface, shining in the firelight like tiny moons. You add beans already softened from hours of soaking, then cornmeal to thicken, then wild onion if someone found it, then salt if enough remains. The stew is not abundant, but it becomes heavier, warmer, more persuasive. The smell drifts across camp, people look up, hope, terrible nutrition label and all, wanders back. Bread is another comfort, even poor bread, especially poor bread, perhaps because it is brave enough to appear under bad conditions. Flour mixed with water and salt can become dough. Add grease and it softens. Add sour milk and it changes again. Cook it in a skillet, on a hot stone, under ashes, wrapped around a stick, or in a Dutch oven if your party has one and has not abandoned it in a tragic weight reduction episode. Bread fills the hand before it fills the stomach, and that matters. A warm piece of bread gives the mind something to trust. You pat dough into a flat cake. Your fingers leave prints along the edge. The pan is hot, greased with a saved spoonful of lard. The dough hits with a soft hiss. Soon the smell turns nutty, smoky, almost sweet. It browns unevenly because frontier cooking believes in character. You flip it with a knife. One side is slightly burned. Burned is just toasted with a difficult personality. So no one complains. There is an amusing little habit in some frontier households of creating coffee substitutes when real coffee ran out. People roasted and brewed things like parched corn, rye, wheat, chicory, acorns, okra seeds, sweet potatoes, or even burned crusts. The results varied from pleasantly bitter to deeply confusing. Still, the cup mattered. A hot dark drink in the morning told people that the day could begin properly, even when the actual coffee had left the household weeks ago and was probably living its best life in a merchant's barrel. You watch roasted grain being crushed and boiled. The liquid darkens. It smells toasty, earthy, a little like coffee seen from a distance in fog. Someone sips it and nods with the serious diplomacy of a person choosing survival over honesty. It is warm. That is enough for now. Comfort food in scarcity often depends on transformation. Old bread becomes thickener, grease becomes gravy, flour becomes dumplings dropped into broth, swelling like soft little pillows if the cook is lucky, and like damp cannonballs if not. Cornmeal becomes mush at breakfast, fried slices at noon, and thickening for soup by evening. Beans become stew, mash, cake filler, or paste. Dried apples become sauce. Vinegar sharpness becomes brightness. Pickle brine may season greens, and a single onion can convince a whole pot that it has depth. Food historians have not fully settled how much emotional comfort mattered in survival compared with sheer nutrition. But diaries and family memories hint at its force. People remembered first bread after hunger, coffee after cold travel, a holiday pie made from nearly nothing, or a stew shared by neighbours during snow. Calories kept muscles working. Familiar taste helped people continue wanting to work. That distinction is delicate, but real. A person who feels human is harder for despair to swallow. You feel it when someone decides to make a small celebration out of scraps. Perhaps it is a birthday, though the date is blurred. Perhaps someone recovered from fever. Perhaps the wagon wheel did not break today, which deserves cake if anything does. A little flour, dried apple, grease, molasses if some miracle remains, maybe an egg if a hen has remembered her purpose. The result is heavy, dark, and uneven. Modern guests might call it rustic, which is polite for possibly dropped, but when it is cut into pieces, the camp grows quiet in reverence. A child receives a slice and inhales before biting. The smell is apple, smoke, sweetness, and hot iron. The child's face changes, not because the cake is perfect, but because it is more than necessary. Scarcity makes luxury small enough to fit in a palm. A sweet crust, a spoon of jam, milk with supper, a pickle, a fried potato. These tiny ceremonies tell the household that life is not only endurance. Cooking also hides inequality when it can. A stew allows small pieces of meat to spread flavour through many bowls. Dumplings make broth seem larger. Gravy stretches fat and flour into warmth. Mush fills space. A cook can send more solids to a child without everyone seeing, or pour broth over an elder's bread to soften it. The pot becomes a quiet instrument of care, not fairness exactly, because hunger rarely permits perfect fairness, but care. Evening settles in layers, first the blue light, then smoke, then the smell of thickened stew, then the sound of bowls being filled. You sit close to the fire and cup your hands around the bowl. It warms your fingers before it reaches your mouth. The first spoonful is plain, but deep with smoke and salt. The beans are soft. The dumplings are not too heavy. a small victory, somewhere at the edge of camp. An ox sighs, someone laughs softly at the fake coffee and says it tastes like roasted fence rail, which may not be wrong, yet the laughter does not break the calm, it folds into it. The meal continues, spoons scrape, fire shifts, a baby sleeps against a shawl, the wind presses the canvas, then eases, for a while. No one counts miles or debts, or the remaining flour. They only eat what has been made from almost nothing, and almost nothing has become enough to call supper. Afterward, the pot is scraped clean, not washed wastefully, not yet. A crust of flavour remains for morning broth. The pan is wiped with the last piece of bread. Coffee substitute grounds are saved because perhaps they can suffer one more boiling. You are learning the tenderness of reuse, the comfort of repetition, the art of turning scarcity into routine without letting routine become despair. You lie down with warmth in your belly and smoke in your hair. Tomorrow may bring thinner broth, it may bring nothing cheerful at all. But tonight, the fire has made a room out of darkness, and the cook-pot has made a meal out of fragments. Hunger still waits beyond the circle of light, listening, but it doesn't get the final word this evening. The final word is the soft scrape of a spoon, the last curl of steam, and the drowsy thought that even a poor supper can carry you gently towards sleep. By the time you've eaten enough thin stews, borrowed enough advice, traded enough goods, and watched enough neighbours quietly save one another from disaster. The old frontier legend begins to wobble. You know the one. The lone settler stands against the sunset, jaw firm, rifle ready, cabin behind him, wilderness before him, needing no one, asking nothing, surviving by pure grit and perhaps cheekbones. It is a handsome image. It is also, like many handsome images, rather selective with the truth. You've seen too much now to believe in loneliness as a survival plan. Morning comes pale and calm over a scattered settlement. Smoke rises from several cabins, not one. A path runs between them, worn by visiting, borrowing, warning, gossiping, and carrying soup to the sick. A fence leans where two men repaired it together. A garden shows seed traded from another household. A cow in one yard came through a neighbour's bull. A child wears a coat cut down from an older cousin's garment. Even the bread on the table has a social life. Flour may have come from a store on credit, yeast from a neighbour, salt from a trader, water from a shared well, and the recipe from a mother who learned it in a place hundreds of miles away. This is how survival actually looks, not like one heroic figure against emptiness, but like a web of hands. One dependable truth from frontier history is that settlers often relied on networks of family, neighbours, merchants, native communities, churches, military posts, rescue parties, and ethnic or religious groups to endure hunger and hardship. People borrowed tools, shared seed, exchanged labour at harvest, raised barns, nursed the ill, took in travellers, traded food, and spread news of danger or opportunity. Even families who prided themselves on independence depended on roads someone else marked, wells someone else dug, ferries someone else operated, and knowledge someone else had painfully earned. You step into a cabin where a woman is pouring meal into a bowl. She's not alone in the story of that meal. The corn came from a field planted with help from neighbours. The field was ploughed with an animal bought on credit. The seed was saved from a previous harvest after advice from a family downstream. The iron pot came from a store supplied by freighters. The firewood was split by an older boy from next door in exchange for milk. The meal will be shared later with a widower whose own crop failed. If a painting tried to include everyone responsible for one bowl of mush, it would need a very wide frame. The myth of self-reliance did have roots in real qualities. People needed courage, endurance, skill, and stubbornness. You could not faint gracefully every time the cow kicked the pail or the beans burned. You needed to patch roofs, mend harness, dig wells, plant gardens, cook from scraps, defend animals, and wake before dawn when every part of you wished to resign. Individual strength mattered, but strength did not float in empty air. It worked inside relationships. The awkward part is that later memory often polished those relationships away. Family stories favoured bravery over borrowing. Local histories praised founders more than cooks, guides, hired hands, or native teachers. National mythology liked the idea of the self-made settler because it sounded clean, masculine, marketable, and nicely free of debts. Actual hunger kept receipts. There is a small comic detail in many frontier communities. Borrowing could become so constant that households developed delicate, unwritten rules about what could be asked for, how soon it must be returned, and whether the borrower was now becoming a public nuisance. A cup of flour was neighbourliness. A third cup of flour in 1 week might become a conversation at the well. Tools, oxen, yeast, fire, salt, bullets, eggs, nursing help, and even beds for travellers moved from house to house. People depended on one another while also keeping score, because generosity and irritation have always shared a fence. You hear it in the way neighbours talk. Of course we helped them when the baby came. Of course they lent us seed after the hail. Of course someone ought to tell the Johnsons that returning a borrowed kettle with beans burned to the bottom is not Christian behaviour. The frontier was cooperative. Yes, but not angelic. People argued, judged, resented, forgave, and borrowed again. Community did not mean harmony. It meant there were enough people nearby that failure did not have to become final at once. A current line of inquiry among historians asks whether the legend of rugged individualism hides the importance of collective labour, government support, and indigenous knowledge in Western settlement. The evidence is hard to ignore. Land policies, military protection, surveys, postal routes, roads, forts, credit systems, railroads, and market connections all shaped who could survive. At the same time, native food knowledge, trade routes, and environmental practices influenced settler survival even when settlers denied the debt. The lone cabin may have looked isolated from a distance, but invisible lines ran from it in every direction. You feel those lines during food shortage. A cow goes dry in one household, so another sends milk for the youngest child. A man leaves to earn wages, and neighbours help his wife cut hay. A family loses flour in a river crossing, and the wagon train divides what remains. A settlement hears of travellers trapped by snow, and a relief party goes out with sacks of meal. A woman with a good sourdough starter shares a bit in a cup, and suddenly 3 cabins have bread with lift instead of flat cakes with ambitions. This, too, is survival, not dramatic, perhaps. But bread rises quietly, and so do people. There is also dependence on systems settlers did not always see. A storekeeper extends credit because he expects crops later. A freighter risks bad roads to haul flour. A blacksmith repairs a wagon tyre. A ferry operator keeps provisions from drowning. A doctor rides through rain. A letter from relatives back east brings money, advice, or news of a better route. Even the government map, however flawed, represents other labour. The frontier was full of people claiming independence while using shared infrastructure with remarkable enthusiasm. Humans are funny that way. And then there are the dependencies that were morally fraught. Settlers survived on land taken, purchased under pressure, or opened through broken treaties and military force. They benefited from bison herds, trails, water sources, and plant knowledge tied to native communities whose own survival was being threatened. A meal of traded corn or learned roots could sit beside the larger hunger created when native food systems were disrupted by settlement. To tell the truth about survival, You cannot simply say people helped one another. You must also ask who paid for the new arrivals to live. The evening light warms the settlement. You stand near a shared well while two women exchange news and a small packet of seed. The packet changes hands quietly, almost casually, but it contains next season's greens, perhaps next season's soup, perhaps a child's better winter nearby. Men lift a beam for a new shed. Children chase chickens with more energy than wisdom. Smoke from several chimneys drifts together until no one can tell which fire made which part of the cloud. Supper in one cabin is bean soup, cornbread, and milk from a neighbour's cow. In another, a family eats potatoes traded for labour. Down the road, a sick man receives broth. No one is rich. No one is entirely secure, but the settlement breathes as a body made of many households, each weak in some places, stronger where tied to others. You sit at the table and tear bread with your hands. It is rough, warm, and slightly sour. Someone mentions that they would have managed alone if necessary. Everyone nods politely, because pride also needs feeding. But you know, and they know somewhere beneath the nodding, that alone is a dangerous word. Alone. The flour runs out faster. Alone. Illness becomes colder. Alone. The field is larger. The night longer. The road more confusing. The fire lowers. The room smells of smoke, bread, wool, and milk. Outside. Footsteps pass on the path between cabins, then fade. You understand now that the great frontier survival skill was not independence. It was interdependence disguised well enough to protect everyone's pride. People survive by saying thank you quietly, by returning the kettle, by sharing seed, by carrying news, by remembering who had helped, and by pretending when necessary. None of this made them any less strong. By the time you understand how much settlers depended on land, animals, water, neighbours, and borrowed knowledge, you begin to notice something else. Survival does not leave the world unchanged. Every meal has a footprint. Every hungry winter reaches backward into autumn fields and outward into forests, rivers, grasslands, herds, and communities. The frontier stomach is not separate from the landscape. It is tied to it by roots, bones, smoke, fences, hoofprints, and empty places where something used to grow or run. You walk at dawn across grass silvered with dew. The air is cool and clean, carrying the scent of sage, damp soil, and distant wood smoke. Larks lift from the ground in quick bursts. The country seems wide enough to absorb anything. That was part of the illusion. Perhaps. The West looked endless to many newcomers, so hunger felt like a problem solved by reaching farther. If game disappeared here, hunt over there. If soil failed here, plough the next valley. If timber thinned, cut beyond the ridge. If grass was eaten down, drive the animals onward. The land seemed enormous, and it was. But enormous is not the same as infinite. As settlers moved, farmed, hunted, grazed livestock, cut wood, built towns, and opened roads, they altered Western ecosystems in lasting ways. Bison herds declined under commercial hunting, military policy, market demand, railroads, and settler expansion. Grasslands changed as cattle, sheep, horses, oxen, and ploughs moved through them. Riverbanks were trampled by stock. Forests near settlements and mines were cut for cabins, fuel, fences, mine timbers, railroad ties, and cooking fires. The food that kept one family alive might be small, but multiplied across thousands of families, camps, forts, and towns. It became a force. You see it first in the woodpile. A cabin needs heat. A cook fire needs fuel. Meat drying needs smoke. Fences need rails. Wagons need repairs. Mines devour timber underground. A single family may cut only what seems necessary, and necessity is a powerful argument. But settlement after settlement draws from the same groves along streams, because on the plains trees often grow mainly where water allows. Cottonwoods vanish first near camps, willows are stripped, brush disappears. Soon the creek is hotter in summer, banks crumble more easily, and birds that nested there shift away. No one meal caused it, all the meals did. The sound of the axe becomes part of hunger's music. Chop, split, stack, burn. In winter, wood is warmth, and warmth is survival. It is hard to ask a shivering child to consider long-term watershed health. History is not fair that way. People make choices inside the weather of need, yet the choices accumulate, and the land remembers longer than the body. Grasslands carry another record. Oxen and cattle graze near trails, camps, forts, and settlements. Horses crop stream edges. Sheep cut plants close to the ground. In moderate numbers, grazing can be part of an ecological rhythm. In concentrated numbers, especially during drought, it strips cover and weakens native grasses. Wagon trains needed pasture for draft animals. Ranches needed range. Military posts needed hay. Mining camps needed pack animals and beef. The hunger of people became the hunger of herds, and the herds moved through grass like weather with teeth. One lesser-known detail is that emigrant trails themselves sometimes became ecological corridors of disturbance, where wagons passed repeatedly, wheels crushed vegetation, animals grazed heavily, camps used nearby wood and water, and discarded seeds from feed or provisions could sprout in new places. The road was not just a line for humans, it carried weeds, livestock diseases, insects, habits, markets, and expectations, even a trail. Thin as it looks on a map, compressed deeply into a landscape when enough wheels follow it. Then there are the wild animals. Earlier, when you watch the empty horizon and hope for deer, rabbit, or bison, you felt hunger from the human side. Now you see the other side too. Hunters killed for immediate food, for hides, for trade, for sport, for military aims, and for market profit. Settler hunger alone did not destroy bison herds, but it formed part of a larger transformation. Commercial hide hunting, railroad access, military campaigns against plains nations, and expanding settlement all converged. The loss of bison was also an attack on the food security, economy, mobility, and culture of many plains native peoples. Hunger travelled through power as much as through weather. Environmental historians keep debating how to weigh settler subsistence needs against commercial exploitation and government policy when explaining ecological change in the West. That debate matters because it prevents easy blame and easy innocence. A starving family shooting game for supper is not the same as a commercial hunter killing hundreds for hides, yet both belong to the same century of pressure. A cabin woodpile is not a railroad tie contract, yet both cut trees. Human need and human greed are not identical, but landscapes often receive them together. You reach a river bend where the bank is churned with hoof prints. The water near shore is muddy. Reeds have been trampled. Someone has set fish traps downstream. A few mussel shells lie open near old ashes. The place has fed people, and it shows. Maybe it will recover after the camp moves. Maybe repeated use will change it for years. You kneel and touch the water. It is cold, moving, indifferent and vulnerable at once. Farming changes the land more slowly but more completely. A field begins as grass turned under, roots broken, soil exposed. Wheat or corn replaces prairie plants. Fences interrupt animal movement. Gardens draw water. Irrigation ditches redirect streams. Ploughs cut into soils that wine can lift when dry. Good years reward the transformation. Bad years reveal its cost when drought comes. Bare soil can blow. When rain comes hard, tilled earth can wash. Settlers learn by trial, but trial is sometimes another word for damage. The hunger for reliable food pushes these changes. A family plants because stored sacks run out. A community expands fields because imported flour is expensive. A ranch grows because beef sells to forts, towns, and railroads. A mining camp demands potatoes, hay, meat, and timber. Markets magnify appetite. What began as survival becomes production, and production reshapes everything around it. Native food systems are changed too, often violently, as settlers claim land, fence water, cut timber, hunt game, and bring livestock. Indigenous communities lose access to seasonal gathering places, hunting grounds, fisheries, and travel routes. Government policies force removals, reservations, ration systems, and dependence on unfamiliar foods. The terrible irony is sharp. Settlers fear months without food while their expansion helps create hunger for the people already living there. A sack of flour issued at an agency may replace a bison hunt, but it does not replace a whole world of movement, ceremony, choice, and skill. You remember the river camp where traded dried meat tasted of smoke and berries. You remember the warning about roots and lookalikes. You remember how much settler survival leaned on knowledge that was not theirs. Now the memory sits differently. Gratitude alone is not enough if it forgets the loss attached to it. Even so, the story is not only destruction. Settlers also adapted. Some learned dry farming techniques. Some planted windbreaks. Some conserved seed, rotated crops, built root cellars, shared water rights, or adjusted herds after hard winters. Native communities endured, resisted, adapted, and maintained food traditions despite pressure and disruption. Landscapes changed, but they were not passive. Grass returned in places, rivers shifted, forest regrew where cutting eased. Animals found new patterns, when allowed. The land suffered and responded, not as a backdrop, but as a living participant. At evening, you stand near a settlement where smoke rises from chimneys and cattle move slowly toward water. The smell of supper drifts through the air: cornbread, beans, maybe fried potatoes, maybe coffee. It is comforting. It is also connected to fields, fences, stores, roads, woodlots, rivers, and histories far beyond the table. You cannot take a bite outside the world that made it possible. The sun lowers, grass turns gold. A hawk circles above the field, riding the last warm air. Somewhere, an axe strikes wood, somewhere else. A child gathers eggs. The sounds are ordinary, and that is precisely why they matter. Survival is made of ordinary acts repeated until they shape the earth. You sit by the fire with a bowl in your hands. The food is simple, warm, and welcome. You're grateful for it. You're also quieter now, aware that every spoonful has travelled through more lives than your own. Hunger drove settlers to invent, borrow, preserve, hunt, plant, trade, and endure. It also drove fences into grass, axes into groves, cattle to streams, and pressure into native homelands. The frontier meal is never only a meal. Night spreads across the land, softening the scars for a while. The dark covers cut stumps, wagon ruts, ploughed fields, trampled banks, and the places where herds no longer pass as they once did. Crickets begin their steady song. Smoke rises and thins into stars. You listen. And in that listening, the lesson settles gently to survive. The West was to depend on the land, and to depend on the land was to change it. The last evening comes quietly, not because the story is finished in any grand way, but because hunger stories rarely end with trumpets. They fade into habits, into recipes, into scars on the land, into family sayings, into the careful way someone saves grease in a jar long after the danger has passed. You sit beside a low fire while the sky darkens from blue to violet, and the air smells of wood smoke, cold grass, damp earth, and supper resting warm in the pot. It is not a feast. Of course it is not. The frontier has not suddenly become generous for dramatic effect. There is cornbread, a little bean stew, perhaps milk if the cow has been kind, perhaps dried apples softened into something sweet enough to comfort the children. A kettle breathes steam into the cooling air. The oxen stand nearby, dark shapes against the fading light, chewing with ancient patience. Somewhere beyond the fire, a night bird calls once, then falls silent. You have carried the whole long lesson now. The empty trail, the bad arithmetic of rations, the hopeful hunt that failed as often as it succeeded, the creekside greens, the traded pemmican, the winter mush, the smoked meat, the cow as walking pantry, the boiled leather nobody wished to remember, the trading post ledger, the women who turned fragments into meals, the children who learned silence, the mining camp where gold could not be eaten, the dry field, the river fish, the fort road, the comforting pot, the myth of independence, and the land changed by every hungry choice. A clear truth from the history of Western settlement is that survival during long food shortages depended on many overlapping strategies rather than one heroic method. Settlers rationed, hunted, foraged, preserved, traded, borrowed, raised livestock, used relief networks, adapted native knowledge, stretched recipes, and relied on family and neighbours. Some succeeded, some barely did, some did not. The past does not owe us a tidy ending. It offers us human beings doing their best with flour dust, sore feet, pride, fear, and an astonishing willingness to try one more morning. You lift your bowl and feel warmth through the tin. The stew is simple, thickened with meal, darkened by beans, scented faintly with onion and smoke. It tastes like every small decision that brought you here. Someone saved the seed, someone kept the cow alive, someone found water, someone traded fairly, someone shared, someone rose in the cold and stirred the pot before dawn. The meal is not only food, it is memory made edible. There is a strange small custom found in many hard-living communities, not only on the western frontier, of continuing scarcity habits long after scarcity eases. People who survived hunger might keep cupboards fuller than necessary, scrape plates with extra care, save string, reuse sacks, distrust waste, or feel uneasy when bread was thrown away. A grandchild might roll their eyes at the old rule about crumbs, not understanding that the rule came from a winter when crumbs mattered. History often hides inside manners. Do not waste that. Finish what you take, save the fat, keep the sack. Those are not only instructions, they are echoes. You hear such echoes in the quiet around the fire. Nobody speaks dramatically of survival. They talk about tomorrow's weather, the fence that needs mending, the calf that wandered, the beans that must soak, the road to town, the neighbour who may need help. Real endurance often sounds ordinary because ordinary life is what people were trying to preserve. Not adventure, not legend, just breakfast, shelter, children growing, elders warmed, animals fed, seed planted, and the next season reached. There remains an open question among scholars about why certain hunger stories became famous, while countless ordinary shortages stayed hidden in diaries, account books, kitchens, and family memory. Dramatic disasters enter public history. Quiet endurance often remains private. Yet most survival happened quietly. It happened when someone watered soup without admitting it, when a neighbour lent meal, when a woman saved the last egg for a sick child, when a child gathered chips for fuel, when a man walked miles to a store and returned with flour bought on credit. No statue needed, just another day made possible. The fire settles lower, embers pulse red beneath ash, The light touches faces gently, smoothing worry lines for a moment. The children lean against blankets, heavy with sleep. The older people sit close to the warmth, hands open toward the coals. Outside the circle of firelight, the land lies dark and immense, not conquered, not tamed in any simple sense, but lived with, argued with, depended upon, wounded and remembered. You think back to the first empty flour sack, shaken in hope though nothing fell from it. At the time, hunger seemed like absence. Now it seems more complicated. Hunger revealed the hidden structure of life. It showed who knew the plants, who controlled the store, who had credit, who owned animals, who received help, who was forgotten, who laboured unseen, who paid the cost when settlers survived. It made visible the connections people preferred to call independence. And yet, the lesson is not only harsh, there is tenderness here too, in the shared bowl, in the extra spoonful given to a child, in the old bones boiled again, in the traded berries, in the woman rising before dawn, in the neighbour carrying milk through snow, in the quiet decision to keep going when the road ahead looks as thin as the broth. The frontier could be cruel, but people met cruelty with skill, stubbornness, humour, and sometimes grace. You break a piece of cornbread and dip it into the stew. It softens at once, drinking up the broth. The taste is smoky, warm, faintly sweet from the corn. Simple food, yes, but simple does not mean small. A meal like this has crossed rivers, winters, markets, fields, hands, cultures, and griefs. It belongs to a world where nothing is guaranteed and everything useful is precious. Night deepens, the last colour drains from the west. Stars appear one by one, cold and bright, the same stars that watch wagon trains, native camps, military posts, mining towns, winter cabins, and lonely roads. The same stars watched people count beans and bury seed, haul water and smoke meat, pray for rain and curse grasshoppers, laugh at terrible coffee substitutes, and whisper promises to hungry children. The pot is scraped, the fire is banked. Someone folds the empty flour sack and sets it aside, because even empty things may be useful. The animals breathe in the dark. The wind moves gently through grass. You sit a little longer, hands around your cup, feeling the quiet weight of all these stories settling into something softer than fear. Survival, in the end, was never one trick. It was attention, it was adaptation, it was community, labour, luck, and memory. It was knowing that tomorrow's meal might be hidden in a root, a river, a neighbour's kindness, a ledger, a milk pail, or a smoky pot of beans. It was not always noble, it was not always fair, but it was human, deeply human, and the embers remember. And now, as the fire lowers into a softer red, you can let the hard edges of the trail fall away. The wagons grow still, the ration box closes. The wind that once worried the canvas now moves like a slow hand across the grass, smoothing the prairie into darkness. There's no need to count the beans anymore tonight, no need to check the flour sack, no need to listen for hoofbeats, storms, swarms, or the thin cry of hunger at the door. The old stories remain, but they have become gentle at this distance. The winter cabin is only a warm square of light. The river is only a silver ribbon under the moon. The trading post is quiet, its ledger closed. The fields sleep beneath dew. The animals breathe slowly in the dark, and somewhere, far beyond the fire, a coyote calls once, softer now, almost respectful. You have walked through hunger and found not romance, but endurance. You have seen how people survive by noticing small things, saving small things, sharing small things, a spoonful of grease, a handful of seed, a cup of milk, a little broth, a little warmth, a little hope, pass carefully from hand to hand. Let that be enough for the night. Your shoulders loosen, your breath settles. The smoke rises in a thin grey thread and disappears into stars. The last ember glows, fades, glows again, like a quiet heart refusing to hurry. The world is wide, but you're safe here, wrapped in darkness, held by the hush after the story. So rest now. Let the trail go on without you. Let the wagons roll into memory. Let the fire become a dream, and the dream becomes softer, slower, kinder, until even the old frontier hunger is only a whisper beyond the light. Sweet dreams.